It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions.
Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Thursday, January 8th, 2026. Thank you for joining me today. Quite an unfortunate series of events over the last so many days. I mean, really, how many times these things compound and how many times Noam or Bondi or Trump or anybody else can make the statements, even if you might decide to think they're good intentioned, that will essentially broadcast to the people doing these things, go ahead and keep doing it. Right? We stand behind you. Like, it's a weird way to respond to something like this, to come out and, or for example, for those that I'm already getting, and for those that don't know what we're talking about, the shooting in regard to today or yesterday into today, discussing ICE and the many different times this has happened, but seeing them cheer on the street after something like this. You know, it's a certain sort of mindset that's being instilled in people today. And the reason I'm even saying this to start is because, you know, we've talked a lot on this show about a transition taking place. And it's not just in front of us politically, societal, governmental. It is, in my opinion, but it's also mental. And what's happening is there's an effort to try to convince us, in like we've covered on this show our entire career, or our entire existence during my career, of trying to get us to call for what would otherwise meet the agenda. And that's not new. Today, it's on full display and it's everywhere, you know, like we've gone over many times, promising you what we've always called for with the plan to switch it out for something else. But very important to get us to sort of call for the very thing that would otherwise be a major, just deviation from what we would expect. And I think it's really important to carry that thought with you always right now, to be able to see how that might be the case, or if you can prove it playing out. But today in particular, as we go through, to think about that major point, because even the shooting, even the ICE conversation, the discussion of constitutional rights, how that connected to foreign policy. Remember how this started? Khalil, Israel, Ozturk. Of course, then it became El Salvador, which is definitely connected to make sure there's no issues here. Yeah, let me know if you guys are seeing this. I hope so. I don't see any issue on my side. But you know, how this is all connected to the larger agenda, discussing the origin point of, like I said, Bukele and El Salvador connected to the network state conversation, but also Venezuela, Biden, immigration, the Insurrection Act. Like, it's, you know, you could have just, I mean, right now, any narrative that's coming out is all rationalized, or rather the solution would be all of the same things. Good. Thank you, guys. And so we're going to talk about today, I decided I was kind of juggling, or rather just waffling over whether I should start with the ICE point today. It's obviously a major incident, and it's very important, and it needs to be discussed. I mean, primarily because a U.S. citizen was shot, because a human being was killed. But secondarily, just, you know, in a very high level of importance, we're talking about the dishonesty on the face of the conversation. And what's interesting is, even as that is why it's so important, it's also why I don't think it's necessary for us. I think a lot of things I want to set on the table first, because I believe anybody who's honest can already see what's going on with that. I mean, unless I just don't put enough weight on the psychological manipulations going on out there, but you can look at the video for yourself. And even if you want to argue that you somehow think it's justified for this person to shoot that car or the woman in the car because he thought he might have been hit. And look, we can get into the reality of why a cop has to respond in a split-second time. I get that argument. But we'll go into this when we get into it all, about I've got cops in my family. I understand the dynamic. I understand also that it's a job for somebody who puts their life at risk. It's like a fireman going, well, I don't want to go in there. I'm like, it burned. You know, that's a ridiculous statement. I'm not saying they should just be frivolous, or that we should allow them to be hurt all the time, but there is a level of risk. But then to always use the hypothetically, maybe there's a risk, or that might have gone the way it was going to go, or that might have turned out to be that way, and then use that to just execute people in the streets. Well, we see where this goes. And it is unjustified. I mean, we'll go through it. I always want to jump all into the obvious points. But I'm going to start with the point that Robert, an article he wrote today. I mean, to some degree start. We're going to have a couple of the points first, but it's really important. He does such an excellent job with this article. And it is something that I've been talking about a lot. And in case you guys don't know this, these are, I mean, I'm not behind the scenes cultivating their content and telling them what I want to see in their articles. That's not the way that I edit. I tell all the people that write for this platform, I want them to write about what they find important and the way that they want to frame it. What you'll get from my end is just making sure it's grammatically correct, making sure that which I also miss plenty of times. But, and then of course, things that I think need to be factually correct. And then occasionally something that I want to include. But overall, it's not, it's my point in saying all this is that Robert took a really interesting direction with the article he wrote today about what I see as a very clear globalist overlap to what our government's doing. And it's not just our government, but how that plays into foreign policy and how it's right now being framed, as I kind of titled today, as this government or this administration more specifically fighting all of that. And it just continues to be the most obvious representation of what we all thought we were fighting during COVID-19, the World Economic Forum, and it's just all still coming out. And so I'm going to go over that article to set the table for that kind of perspective, and it relates to Israel, Iran, and Venezuela, and that very much then does relate to ICE and what's happening in this country. So we'll get into all that today and a few other points that I think are very relevant that we'll go over. But I want to start with something I just use this to remind myself. This is just the Give, Send, Go we've had since we've been under attack for my entire career. But it's a Give, Send, Go that doesn't get much traffic. But if you want to support us, you can do so. Here's the link. I'll include it in the show notes. The reason I'm showing you this, I wanted to remind myself to point out that Derek and I decided yesterday we're going to be doing a fundraiser. And we don't do these very often. I don't want to exhaust the conversation. I mean, I don't even like doing these in general. I don't like marketing and selling ourselves. Just, me, I hate that. But it's important because we're both in a situation. In fact, it seems everybody we know is in a very similar situation. Everybody, not even that we work with, people that we just in the field that we recognize who you wouldn't expect are struggling right now. And it's not just because, it's because of suppression. That's my opinion, but there's a lot of excellent people out there, wildly talented, very well thought out, put together platforms, excellent editing, and yet borderline going out of business. But again, most people don't even know these things because this is behind the scene conversation. And I'm not going to, air anybody's dirty laundry, or it wouldn't be that, but secrets or rather just behind the scenes information. But I'm very transparent with this, and we've been attacked relentlessly, and we are still very much. I don't want to. I'm going to keep doing this. I always say that because it's not like I'm trying to say this will go away if you don't support us. Because as much as that might help donations, it's not the truth. I'm going to keep doing this, whether it's on me and my cell phone, as I've jokingly said, on my underwear in my room, sitting, whatever, just talking about whatever. I'm going to keep doing this, but this will continue to diminish if we don't get support, and so will all the rest of the platforms out there that need it. So we're going to do a fundraiser to kind of talk about that, but also to raise support or resources for both of our platforms. So it's going to be a Conscious Resistance and Last American Vagabond joint fundraiser. And so we're going to be aiming for the 16th. I'm going to be putting more about that in the next couple of days. I'm going to be setting a link for it. I believe I can do that ahead of time and get that out for you guys. And it's going to be sort of it's not really set time-wise. It's going to be up in the air how long we go, but it's going to be sort of a day event where we do kind of what we did last time and have people invited in. I always reference this in Hawaii when I lived there for over 2 years. There's a thing called the Kukua Festival that Jack Johnson always put on. And I always loved the idea of it because it really just was called Jack Johnson and Friends. And you really didn't know who else was going to go. There was usuals you could expect, but as the story goes, he just put out the invite to everybody he knew. It was kind of just a known idea, and that any people would just randomly show up, and you'd be like, oh my God, that person showed up this time. And so the idea today, or for this discussion, will be that we're going to invite anybody that we want to have come, just throw out the link to everybody. And so it'll be kind of an unexpected event for the day. And we have things we'll plan. We have things we might give away based on certain donations, plans for our upcoming content. But just so you guys know, that'll be coming out soon. And it'll be a way to raise awareness and also support the platform. So that to start. And then one other note I wanted to make about something going on. I didn't see this. Decentered News sent me this. Zionism Observer. Now, I don't know them personally, but I support their work. We follow each other, and I think they do great work. They're calling out very important, contentious things, and they're under attack. And this is an interesting reason. This is, there's a lot of censorship going on, but this is about their domain. And this is what I've been worried about. This has happened. I've been with TruthStream Media They had the Daily Sheeple a long time ago. I think they may still have it, but that they got their domain taken a long time ago. But it hasn't happened like we might expect, like this continual, the new censorship. But here we are. Namecheap has released their domain recently, but they're now facing possible demonetization by Buy Me a Coffee, which I've had an issue with that in the past, and other platforms, and basically just shouting out what they're dealing with. So I just want to point that out and think about the idea of the future in which they can just pull, from the root domain names, entire platforms, hosting. That's where this goes. And I'll include their link, their kind of archive link to all the work they're doing with tons and tons and tons of verifiable content that you can check out for yourself. So let's start with some partisan stuff that I do think is important about Epstein, which is very clearly still important and almost the point when you recognize when this all started in Venezuela was the day that, or at least one of the days they were supposed to be releasing things and did not. I don't think that was the whole reason, but you could have argued that's one more reason why they said, perfect, let's do it that day. But overall, too, we've been saying this for a while, right? Not just the two-party illusion, but in particular, post-2025 forward, or after 2025, that I've been saying for a while that I think conservatives are very much just not buying it anymore. And it's the same thing I said before with, the COVID-19 overlap, and I think we were proven correct. It's not because it's because people are just not buying it. People are starting to see through classically held manipulations or beliefs, I was going to say, but just, a lot of things that we haven't, just vaccines as a whole, the conversation, or things like any number of examples through the current administration where you never would have expected people who are diehard supporters to just go, yeah, I'm not supporting him anymore. This just doesn't feel right. It's interesting. It's important. And it shows you what I guess I'm trying to stress is let's not take this as a partisan thing. This is about average people who are and are not, depending on where, are in one part of it or not, partisanship or not, support Trump, maybe not, are just generally starting to see through it and call this stuff out. And I think that's the reactive nature of what we're seeing in the government. Because if you don't have this game, the censorship, the manipulation, like think ADL, Greenblatt saying it's not a left-right problem, it's an age problem, right? How do you deal with that if your entire system is built on divide and conquer, on censorship, right? But now we have a point where people aren't buying. I think it's worth thinking about. So here's Simon Godek pointing out, and that's just we're going to get to a couple points about that, but this is a point about Dan Bongino. And he says, be conservative commentator. He's kind of like listing his time frame. Build huge audiences talking about Epstein. Epstein didn't kill himself. Hinted blackmail. All the different things, protection and so on. Audiences eat it up, become FBI director. Now it's case closed. Suddenly Epstein didn't kill himself, which he said. Claims there are no Epstein files, which he said. Documents eventually get released. Massive redactions everywhere. Nothing new learned. No accountability. No names. Leave government. Go back to podcasting. Restart outrage cycle. Act like the middle part never happened. That's what's happening. He's out there acting like the Epstein. It's just kind of sad that we're in a position where people like this can say one thing, do another, and then just go right back to the routine. But because we live in this false kind of theater-driven world right now, it doesn't even matter, at least to a lot of people. But I don't believe that's the majority, like I was saying a second ago. I think that the majority of people are now going, these people are lying to us. But as always, the mainstream alternative media circle is highlighting the people who are not really the majority as the full picture. By the way, like the corporate media has been doing to us our entire lives. Now, on top of that, the sixth, Epstein files might not be released in full until Trump leaves office, which basically means never, guys. That's how this goes. This drip release kind of never ending, maybe next year, give us a month, one more redaction until we just stop paying attention, until it just stops getting talked about. Many people are refocusing elsewhere now because this is becoming old news. But this is insane. Like, this is the huge, this was the central part of what they said they were going to accomplish. And really they didn't say Epstein files, but it was about pedophilia and revealing the deeper secrets of the Democrat. And here we are where they're now completely, they've broken the law. Let's be real about that. Very obviously. And here's Massey to point that out, or next to Judge Judd Legum simply says the DOJ has not released 99% of the Epstein files in direct violation of the law, which it is. It doesn't matter. You could make an argument for why that shouldn't apply, but let's acknowledge it is a violation of the law as it currently stands. They claim the delay is necessary to review the files. However, the DOJ previously claimed the review was complete in July, which they did. This is my point, guys. This is just everyone anywhere who cares to look can already see this. That is going to be a redundant point, but we have to realize if you stand back and go like with COVID, that look, everyone kind of sees this right now. That has to change the way we engage with everything. Because if we engage with it as if, though the Democrats just don't see it, or the Republicans are all, it's not the truth. It's just not. And we're falling into the traps they're creating using the partisanship. So here's Massey, quote, "The biggest problem isn't that they're missing deadlines. It's what they're redacting," which we already know. They've redacted names of child predators. That was very clearly broken down. They've redacted Trump's name up at least 16 or 600 times. They're trying to pretend the Privacy Act overrides a law that explicitly says you can't withhold records to prevent embarrassment. Wild. Now, next is something he recently said. This is Massey on the Epstein files. "If this were a private law firm with 5% of the resources of the DOJ, this would have been done by the deadline," which is actually an easy point to make. They just missed another deadline to report all of the politicians in their files, and they're supposed to justify all of their redactions. The biggest problem isn't that they're missing deadlines, it's that they're redacting. Here's what he said.
For the fact that these Epstein files still, there are millions of more documents that they're still reviewing at this point.
If this were a private law firm with 5% of the resources of the DOJ, this would have been done by the deadline. And they just missed another deadline, which is the report to Congress, which is supposed to list all of the politicians that are in their files. And also, they're supposed to justify all the redactions 15 days after the first 30-day window. But
that's important. Don't miss that. That means that they've already passed a time frame when they were supposed to justify the previous redactions, and they haven't done that either. That's a small thing that it's not small, but in the context of everything, that's going to get forgotten. It's going to get dropped. And then we should always be able to go back and be like, you never did this, but they need to go, this is why we did X, Y, and Z, at least to them. I doubt that'll ever happen, meaning they just covered up for very big criminals and we're never going to find out why.
The biggest problem isn't that they're missing the deadlines, is what they're redacting. So they're citing the Privacy Act, and they're trying to pretend like that overrides a law that we just passed that says you can't withhold records to prevent embarrassment. They're also citing FOIA standards, which don't apply to our law, when they're trying to say that they don't have to release internal decisions. But our bill specifically says release internal decisions.
So what are you going to do about it?
We're looking at that.
It's pretty clear, right? So you can prove this is the way, if it says that they're supposed to release their dialogue, right, in their inner decision making, and they don't, well, that's not a secret. And it's obvious why they're doing that, because they don't want you to know. And if it was just simply, victims, like they continue to pretend while accidentally releasing victims' names, then that would be simple, wouldn't it? This is just self-explanatory, guys. And this is important. As much as the desperate few who you could always point out are really trying to make you think this is irrelevant, a Democrat lie, you're not a Republican if you talk about this, and you know who we're talking about. And they are like a sore thumb sticking out right now. Laura Loomer comes out, and this is a perfect example of that. It says Massey is basically a Democrat. It's just the stupid. Look, if you understand the reality of Democrat, Republican, and the core issues, they're not that different at the end of the day, despite narrative. But when you look at what they would argue a Republican should do, and I've brought this image up before, look at the Republican Party line, and then look at how much Massey adheres to that more than almost anybody, well, more than all the America First politicians. So how in the world are you going to call him a Democrat? Look at what the Democrats do. He's not even near that. So she's just a desperate hair on fire. Don't look at him, Massey, because he makes us all look like clowns. And I'm not even saying that's because you should trust him. I question and doubt everybody, but I will point out that his continued principled stances and follow through will make me day by day support him more. This is just somebody who clearly has an agenda to go, what he does right now makes the people like her who scream America first look like absolute hypocrites. And they know that. This says Loomer Unleashed. Jasmine Crockett, one of the leaders of the House Democrats, has reposted Massey's post that calls to question the legality of Trump's decision. Right. So because a Democrat shares what he says, which is accurate and correct and verifiable, therefore he Democrat. Therefore, you're an idiot. This is exactly what this person says. You're basically an idiot. It's just sad, guys. And these people are huge. 2 million followers. Now, again, in no way does that mean respect. Does that mean, anything other than influence on this platform? But it does very much carry over as we see the corporate media seemingly, despite years of telling you this is all social media people in their basements, now suddenly using this to dictate who is important because it's always been a part of the game, guys. Top of that, don't miss this story. This is also going to fall behind. Now, where are all the conservatives? All the There are honest plenty of them out there. And again, if you understand behind the scenes, I think it's most of them. But the people in the inner circle up there, the Joneses of the world, where are you guys? Didn't we care about January 6th? Wasn't the whole point that we were supposed to arrest people because what about that? Guess what? Well, they got someone arrested, but it's not the guy, and they don't care about that. So clearly they don't care about actual accountability. Or Nancy Pelosi, it seems. They just wanted a figure, an illusion, right? We got the guy. Move on. Stop paying attention. We got Robinson. Stop looking, right? This is what they seem to do right now. Joe points out defense demands pipe bomber suspect Brian Cole Jr. be immediately released due to no preliminary hearing and no valid indictment. This appears to me, now this is early, to be something that's going to almost be designed to not go anywhere, just like everything else Kash Patel has done. And really just the current administration and the U.S. government that seems to pull his strings. Because really, if you look at James Comey and Letitia James and even Bolton, it appears, or any number of the cases we've talked about, the shooting in the Dallas office or the supposed Halloween plot or the New Year's Eve plot, for crying out loud, these things are completely a joke. It doesn't mean they won't force through some kind of a charge, but I doubt it will be anything they're screaming at the podium, like we're going to get into the shooting of the ICE officer shooting the U.S. citizen. And now Noam calls her a domestic terrorist. And even if everything they're saying is true, to jump to that level is a joke. It should be laughed at. But his continued detention is illegal, says the defense attorney, of course. But here, Massey says the judge should release autistic. Of course he's autistic. January 6th pipe bomber suspect, Brian Cole. No credible motive. Presents danger to no one, flimsy evidence, no priors, willing to wear a tracker under house arrest, family will vouch, and DOJ botched the legal work, irreparable harm to him otherwise. Let's not forget that, as Massey points out, all the information we have, the gate move, everything relates to a potential Capitol police officer. And here we are, though. Pick the autistic guy who can't put up a defense. This is typically what we've seen in the past. Here's Owen Schroer just pointing out, but this is a couple quick points to show you that there's people out there that are just not buying it anymore. He says, how did we go from this to that? Marjorie Taylor Greene, who still stands by most of the things that Trump said he was going to do, now she's the bad guy because she calls him out for it. And then next to Mark Levin. Biggest downgrade ever, he says. Here is the QAnon shaman. Remember this guy? Huge Trump supporter, massive, like major. He was at January 6th, the whole thing, right? CNN. You stole a Trump supporter? He says, no, I thought you knew that. Why not? Refusing to release the Epstein client list was enough for me and a lot of other people. Like, okay, this is BS. There you go. Now, that doesn't mean he's right. He could be wrong. Maybe he's missing something. Maybe it'll all come out. But what I'm trying to show you is that average people, whether you think that's who he is or not, but just a lot of conservatives are just like, this is too much. I don't believe in this anymore. And that's a really good thing if you understand where we actually are. Now, here's a couple other points before we get into Robert's article and then Iran and Venezuela really quickly. This is interesting to me. Orwell shared this with me. Noam announces the 2.6 million illegals. Now, let's start by saying, by the way, that they say a lot of stuff that just flatly isn't true, and you can usually prove that. Just keep in your mind that maybe these numbers aren't correct. I know that would be shocking, but announces that 2.6 million illegals have left our country since Trump took office, including, and she cites this, so this is the other number, probably fudged for a lot of reasons, but she cites specifically, 650,000 who were arrested, detained, and deported, and 2 million who self-deported. Oh, actually, you know what? I grabbed the wrong number. That's hilarious. Hold on. Let me do it again since I got the calculator up. I actually did 650. The point is 2 million who self-deported, right? And she points out here, they were paying $3,000 for people who self-deported by December 31st. Now, again, there's factors up in the air, right? People who self-deported without being paid or just, whatever. But just recognize the amount of money this could potentially represent. And I think, look, since it's so up in the air for a lot of reasons, let's just take 650,000, even though it's actually almost, 3-4 times that, if you want to really be honest about it. 2 million, she says. That comes to almost $2 billion. And that's clearly, that's probably a good representation, seeing as how she's saying 2 million and we're only doing about 650,000. But that's a lot of money to pay people to do something which would have been done for free, or rather, technically, the process would cost us taxpayer dollars. But there's a ton of process around all this anyway, and then they're spending $2, $4, $6 billion to pay them to leave, if that's what happened. Just making a point, really. That's wild. And on top of everything else, Doge and all the lies, no, not cutting costs, government getting bigger, your costs increasing. At some point, we got to go, which I think everyone's doing, we're being lied to. And then this point's interesting. U.S., this is why I was pointing to that, U.S. is considering, so it's not 100% yet, paying Greenlanders $10,000 to $100,000 each to support secession from Denmark. What is happening? Like, how in the world are we at a point where the U.S. government, or at least Trump and his team, think that it makes sense to be like, hey, guys, we'll bribe you to revolt, to literally, I mean, wouldn't Trump call this treason? If an American citizen's like, yeah, pay me $100,000, I'll secede, I'll support leaving the U.S. government. They would call that terrorism right now. If they stubbed their toe hard, they call it terrorism today. So here we are, where they're literally talking about paying people in Denmark to agree to do something which would be illegal in every possible sense, to just seize Denmark. And well, we're paying them to be okay with it, so that makes it legal. I mean, and so that's the point, is just the illegitimacy of everything they're doing, the illegality of everything they're doing. But on top of that, we're taking Greenland. And then on top of that, money, all the money we're saving, you're just going to keep spending. How much would that amount to? Another $1 billion? So just think about how all of this amounts to the larger picture. Is this America first? Is this amount to anything other than a globalist intent to control more territory and exert your will over it, which is the only real definition? Pretty clearly. Now here is just the overlaps I'll include, and this isn't the only point, but I think it's important that this is from February. Startup linked to Peter Thiel wants to build the next great city in Greenland. Now, this goes back a ways where he brought this up, wanting Greenland for this reason, but you could argue that wasn't the driving force, as I've said before. Here, Orwell shared this with me. Trump ally who inspired Greenland purchase idea, quietly invest in Greenlandic companies. Even if it's just money, these people are vultures. It's incredibly obvious. And you think that's different than Biden's administration, you're not paying attention. These guys are just on the face about it. But I do think this is a driving factor. The network state agenda, it's all part of this bigger picture of changing the way society operates for the benefit of them. And of course, you could argue that means the benefit of everybody. I simply disagree. Now, this is a really great article. I just want to stress that again. Robert did a great job on this. And it's the bigger picture that we'll get into in the latter part of the article that I think really brings this together. But first, let's just get into the regime change tactics and how clear this is right now. From Caracas to Tehran, how Trump's Venezuela invasion serves Israel's geopolitical agenda. Now, it says the U.S. attack on Venezuela on January 3rd, remember the same day that one of those deadlines were for the Epstein files, killed at least 40 Venezuelans. They don't talk about this, by the way, as if those lives are just meaningless. That's on top of the 32 or more Cuban nationals who were also killed. No war, though. Just a casual event. It's clearly that's a massive war crime on top of the fact that it is an act of war for every possible reason. The killing, the invasion, the extradition of their leader. It's just wild to even pretend it's not. There can be no doubt, he writes, that what occurred was a violation of the United Nations Charter, specifically Article 2, Section 4. That said, having established that the primary goal of the operation, at least as they'll state, was the control of Venezuelan oil, the largest proven reserves on Earth, the implication of this act extends well beyond the nation itself, because in their stated intention, they do say secure the oil. But I'll clearly point out that there's many more factors at play here, and maybe saying the oil was a way to keep us from looking at those other factors. Clearly, the oil plays a good factor in this, maybe the primary one, and as Robert makes an excellent argument for why that may be the case, things that I hadn't even considered. Now, he goes on to say, where were we? There is a reason why Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been such a vocal proponent of regime change in Caracas, Venezuela, as have Israel lobby-linked think tanks like the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. This is the same Zionist crowd, by the way, that pushed for wars in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and beyond. You can play the list of 7 countries, 5 years, Netanyahu's book, like it's all the same conversation. All of these things relate to Israel's larger agenda, Greater Israel, and others. That doesn't mean that's the only reason, if not the reason, but it is a factor from Israel's perspective for why they might drive this, lobby this. It's important to think about it, but I very much do think that's the driving factor, my personal opinion. The reason is clear. He writes, all these operations benefit Israel. Donald Trump's declarations regarding Venezuelan oil are important for the Israelis. Not only was Iran an ally of Nicolas Maduro, but the robbery of the nation's oil will help the United States and Israel circumvent a possible oil crisis in the event of a major war against the Islamic Republic. We just talked about that. We've mentioned it many times over the years. Thank you again for whoever just asked me to do that in the live show the other day, because it was important. Then we've talked about the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. We've talked about Oman. We've talked about Yemen. We've talked about, the UAE. We've talked about Somalia, Somaliland. All of these, at least in part, are in because of that desire to control these waterways. In this case, what they're pointing out on top of that, rather, in this case is that unclear, the desire to control these areas are because of those straits and the shipping lanes through there, and the need to control it because Iran can potentially shut down the Strait of Hormuz in the event of an attack, which, by the way, they haven't the last few times that they've been attacked, even though they said they would. But who knows? They can pull that card whenever they'd like. And that would then drastically affect the world, but in particular, the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Israel. So taking this oil, which they're doing and have already begun, is interesting to think about, that it very well could be just a safeguard, a safety net for if that should happen, and now they can attack Iran. That's just the simple first point, and that's a very good point to consider. Now it goes, and then that's just the oil, by the way. We know the rare earth minerals plays into the AI direction, plays into any number of electronic, globalist, elitist, technocratic agendas. But on top of that, you've got gold, wealth, geostrategic control, tons of things. Now, one of the biggest cards that Tehran holds in the event of war, as he writes, is that they will close off the Strait of Hormuz, meaning that the Arab Gulf nations would no longer be able to export oil from the Persian Gulf area. Now, that's not, it would be more difficult. But I would argue that his point is simply that would be in conjunction with other things. But at the end of the day, it's a huge factor. Another option Iran has is to simply target the oil facilities at their source. Now, it says, by seizing control of Venezuela's oil resources, the U.S. can not only provide a solution to such a crisis, but even in the absence of war, so say there's not an issue with Iran, they can still leverage the oil supplies of the Latin American nation and use them for future agendas. For example, this would give the Trump administration greater sway over Saudi Arabia, right? For negotiations, for coercion, rather. The major concession that Washington seeks from Riyadh and Saudi Arabia is for it to sign the so-called Abraham Accords and normalize ties with Tel Aviv, something that Saudis have so far refrained from doing, insisting that a Palestinian state be established first. Frankly, that I don't think that's genuine for what they've done everywhere else, but still what they stated. So, where was that? That was one thing I was going to say there. So, seizing control of the resources, the U.S. can not only provide a solution to such a crisis, but in the event of, the point was simply that not only are they seizing the oil, in many ways, tankers, they just seized another tankers, by the way, that don't even apply to what they claim they're doing. But on top of that, the actual industry, as they've made very clear, right? Bringing in oil companies, working with the VP and others. We'll get into that in a second. And ultimately creating that industry through them and forcing Venezuela to do what they want, which is what they're currently doing, as we'll get into as well. You have to buy only U.S. goods. You can only do, but hashtag democracy. They're laughing at everybody, guys, and they know what they're showing the world. We can do what we want. Shut up. Yeah, try us, right? We'll scream democracy right down your throat. That's what they're going to do. And it says, it is important to keep in mind that greater control of the United States government translates to immediate gains for the Israelis, who remains its closest ally and largest recipient of foreign aid. Washington and Tel Aviv are clearly pursuing a joint agenda. Now, that's, again, these points are often pushed back because of some perceived conspiracy theory. Whether you think that's what drives the thought or not, that's a self-evident thought. It's proven. They're stating their joint agenda and objectives here. So it's important to make sure we're clear about that and not shy away from certain topics because people will assume the worst. The fall of a sovereign Venezuela also fits into a new Israeli project, the Isaac Accords. And essentially, we're talking about as it says, was initially launched between one of the foreign ministers of Israel and Javier Milei, of course. And it's basically another extension of the Abraham Accords, target Muslim majority and Arab nations. It's really just the same kind of dynamic. And it says, where was I? Right there. The region is also key to Israel, which has faced some of its fiercest diplomatic opposition since October 7th. Now, that's important to think about, is that pretty much the entirety of the global South is pushing back against what Israel's doing. And in many legal ways as well, which clearly this is in their interest to stop these governments from doing that. Because they've lost. The world sees this. The warrants are out. But of course, if they can just topple government after government to get them to start saying something else, well, there's no enforcement arm anymore. And it says, for example, the first 15 nations to file interventions in favor of South Africa's genocide suit against Israel, 7 of them were in the Latin American countries. All the ones they're focusing on, by the way, Cuba, Mexico, Nicaragua, Colombia, Bolivia, Chile. It's the whole list. And it says, if we take a brief look at the region now, Bolivia has since lost its leftist government through the electoral process, of course, as of recently, as well as, of course, documented election interference by the U.S. government that led to Evo Morales being forced to flee and then put in a military junta, which they called democracy, and they backed away. And of course, through that, it gets less attention. They have continued to manipulate the situation. As Elon Musk famously said about Bolivia, we'll coup whoever we want. Get the lithium. I mean, it's very transparent what they're doing. And it says, it continues, as has Chile, by the way, also lost its government, with both on the way to being taken over by right-wing pro-U.S. leaderships. The recent fall of Venezuela directly threatens the heavily sanctioned economy of Cuba. Colombia, Nicaragua, and Cuba remain under the direct threat of U.S.-led regime change efforts. As of right now, even Mexico, as you've seen, has been publicly threatened. Although it does not appear as if a coup or invasion is imminent, they've repeatedly pointed that out, that they're next, that they're on the list. We better watch out. Claudia, I think it's Scheinbaum, just basically calling her out for certain things they didn't agree to. Or, at the end of the day, it's transparent that it comes down to doing what the U.S. government wants. They just pretend that's always the same thing as what's correct. As what they want is always the same thing as what's legal or morally acceptable. It's not. In fact, it's usually the opposite from what we can see. But so in this case, if they militarily invade to force the government to do what they think, then they just go, well, that's what the world wants, right? That's democracy. It's just not. Even if you agree, even if the outcome will eventually be that, doing it that way is illegal. It doesn't ever go that way. Look at our own history, guys. That's the argument, is people argue that has to happen because of where we are. Okay, well then point out an example of where that's ever ended up, even from Trump's administration, benefiting anybody other than the elitists in his circle. You won't find one. It says U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who plays a key role in guiding the Trump administration's foreign policy, is a Cuban American who has a personal agenda in seeking the overthrow of the government in Cuba. Rubio is also the recipient, of course, of over $1 million in Israel lobby funds, but no big deal. Doesn't play a factor there. Israel's involvement with U.S.-backed right-wing dictators in Latin America is nothing new. For example, Israel was a primary supplier of weapons to the regime of the infamous Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. And by the way, it's insane if you look through the background and you just pick out the worst people that have existed in our history and find how shockingly obvious it is that Israel and the United States just so happen to be working with them, just so happen to arm them, just so happen to drive their agenda. Rwanda, Bosnia, I mean, it's just incredibly obvious. But you're racist if you point out the obvious. And so here is another example. Pinochet was a monster who they put in place and they supported. Of course, he came to power as a result of a U.S.-backed coup against the country's popular socialist leader, Salvador Allende. Now remember, socialism bad, therefore we're going to put in a guy that just is a despotic monster, but as long as it's better than socialism, well, guess what? That sounds familiar. The lesser of evils, pick him because she's just so bad. Well, probably they're both just as bad. Doesn't change the fact that you're still getting evil, guys, and they will play this forever. Are we to pretend that those are the only 2 people possible of being elected? What do people in the country actually want? Well, they don't matter because they're borderline terrorists until we have the person we want in place. Just ask Palestinians. It's dishonest at the core. Even after the U.S. eventually imposed an arms embargo on Pinochet's regime in 1976, following the mass slaughter of tens of thousands of his own people and various other rights abuses. There's a whole lot to get into to whether or not that was them, they're just covering their actions or him not going along with the plan, which is always what happens in history. Every time they work with one of these monsters, eventually these people wear out their usefulness or stop wanting to be controlled, and they get rid of them and use somebody else. Ask Saddam Hussein, ask Osama bin Laden, ask any number of people that they've done exactly that with. And the biggest boogeyman in the world was 30 seconds ago a U.S. ally or agent. Where was I? I keep losing my place. And so after the mass slaughter of tens of thousands of his own people and rights abuses, the guy they put in place illegally, Israel continued to not only supply weapons for him way after that atrocity, but became its top supplier. Sort of like with Rwanda and every other situation where you can find that they're the ones that were arming and stoking the problem. Not alone, mind you, but in many of these cases, predominantly. And it says, even providing intelligence and training for the regime's forces. Pinochet, The newly elected president of Chile, Jose Antonio Cast, is an open admirer of Pinochet. He's the president-elect today. Open admirer of Pinochet, as well as just so happens to be the son of a former Nazi Party member, but no big deal. They're okay as long as they're in support of Israel. Doesn't that make sense? A former Nazi Party family member, somebody supports one of the worst dictators we know of, but he supports the U.S. agenda in Israel, so we just ignore that. Right? Here's Saudi Arabia, an open authoritarian dictatorship, but they're okay because, they support us. That's really how this goes, and that is it's self-explanatory. Israel has trained, advised, and supplied weapons to right-wing groups and regimes across Latin America. I link right there to the Azov movement, which is one of those conversations that you've seen, in case you just don't know that. This goes back to the articles 2018. You guys have seen it more than once on the show, where it talks about rights groups in Israel are demanding Israel stop arming neo-Nazis. Now, that may seem ridiculous and confounding if you don't know the history. But it's not. It's actually pretty common for Israel to fund the very people they claim they're fighting, just like the United States, which is where that agenda comes from, in my opinion. Nazi ideology, cite evidence that the right-wing Azov militia, who they're funding. This goes back a long way, guys. As well as regimes all across Latin America. Israel's continued to fund, so is the United States, including and there's a link to the actual breakdown of these information. So as always, you can verify it for yourself. Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, and Venezuela. Just a few. And these things are all verifiable, but we're questioning today whether they're doing the same thing yet again. Bolton literally wrote a book about how many times they tried to do this, but we all question it. Meanwhile, which we should question everything, right? It's not what I'm saying. The point is that when you have proof of something, it becomes unnecessary to stand back and go, and I mean proof. Not evidence. Evidence can be falsified, but proof, which means it's definitive, which is where we are with almost every one of these things. Meanwhile, popular left-wing movements across the region have typically allied themselves with the Palestinian cause. Now, that does not mean good, correct, legal, but it means that they're the ones that have allied with the Palestinian cause and the resistance force to it and are largely framed as bad because of that alone. Now, in regime change in Iran, this entirely organic series of protests was hijacked. Now, he cites his article in this, which he just recently put up for TLAV. Israel launches its latest Iran revolution as Trump threatens war. And so read this if you want to get into the deeper understanding of how very clearly this was something that started organic, which is usually how this goes. And the unions backed them. He'll describe this here. And then just like we see in the United States, which is something I really want you to think about in this article for where we are in this country. They're doing this to you right now. You have a protest and you got black-clad people that run up, and it's not just left or right, guys. Clearly, it's happening in the entire conversation. Any American pushing back against the government, they come up and they start causing violence, and they cause you terrorists, and then they use to justify what they want. In this case, Iranians were protesting the collapse of the rial, obviously, because we can clearly see U.S. sanctions doing that. They can acknowledge that, but they also, as Robert points out, have criticisms with the way Iran handled that situation. And so they're upset for many reasons because their money's it's collapsing. So they're protesting organically. And then publicly talking about it with the people that interview. We don't want anybody coming in outside. We want to deal with we want to express our protest, which Robert points out in the last article, very consistently in the past has led to people being fired, has led to changes in policy. When's the last time you saw that happen in the United States? Again, that's not good, bad, or right, wrong. It's just an example showing you that at least they lie about these governments. And in many cases, they do things that we wouldn't even see here. But plenty of bad things too. We can very clearly call out. But this started organic. Protests were immediately hijacked, or very quickly. Iranian opposition media and Israeli propagandists began disseminating old, out of context footage, or out of context footage, and AI generated videos. Now, the last show, it was just, I could have gone on for hours. Alex Jones, Benny Johnson, Nick Sorter, what's that new guy? There's all doing it. All of them getting caught repeatedly. Wall Street Apes, Memes, Therefore I Am. All of these major accounts constantly sharing and resharing and repeating. I don't remember. I can't actually see a single example. I'm sure it's out there. I guarantee you there's a protest out there. People who support it, they could even pay people to do that. But weirdly enough, the only ones that we were getting, and everyone's pointing this out, were people like that, the Joneses of the world, repeatedly sharing provenly false information, AI generated videos that even Twitter called out. And so they lied about it. This is almost out of nowhere. Rioters and armed militias began popping up across the country. The rioters have been caught online and even filmed themselves doing so, opening fire on security forces because they wanted that to be seen. That's the point. Why? You have to think about why they would film that. It's about trying to create the narrative that Iranians are firing on the government because they're just so ready for a regime change or whatever the narrative is. They have also attempted, but so far failed, to seize armories, police stations, government buildings. Think about why. This is very clearly, I'll let him explain. Homes, cars, stores, mosques, and even copies of the Quran have been frequently burnt by the rioters, which again is the point about if MAGA was protesting the government and they started burning American flags, you'd be like, that just doesn't make any sense. They don't support the government, but they very clearly believe in the American flag. And so in this case, you've got people just like that. You've got Iranians who, what they're trying to do is make it go back to the Shah and the weird interim thing they did at post Operation Ajax before they were back overthrown. That's a fraction of the history. And they pretend like that's the whole representation of the country. That's not the reality, guys. They support, and you can ask them, you can do your own due diligence. When they start burning the Quran and other things, and let's also point out one more thing. Not everybody in this country is Muslim. Not every country believes this matters, or every person, but it very clearly is the majority. And so when you see that by the very people who are being called out by the rest of them, it says something. And it's about trying to signal to the world that the loomers of the world are correct, right? The Muslims are bad and everybody hates them. It's just nonsense. And in fact, it's getting no popular movement. Interesting. And it says, well, some operatives plastered over local street signs, making this even more clear, replacing them with Trump banners. Of course, because that makes sense, right? The guy who's bombed your country, the guy who's assassinated one of your most cherished leaders. Yeah, let's support him. As covered in his previous article for the Last American Vagabond, these riots are far from organic. Anti-Iran social media accounts have even produced collages of civilians alongside the names of individuals claiming they were murdered by the Iranian security forces. Now, wouldn't you imagine that would be easy to prove if any of what you're saying is true? Well, it turns out many of these individuals later went online and made it clear that those were fake and that they're still alive and that didn't happen. We already showed you an example of them trying to claim they were torturing people, and that turned out to be an image from a movie on Netflix. I mean, this is Israeli propaganda. We saw the same thing during the ongoing genocide, by the way, sharing video. What was that? A thing from Amazon that they was claiming were chemical weapons instructions. Like, they got caught repeatedly. It's the same lazy propaganda. And it says, in addition to all of this, videos have emerged of a truckload. And I want you to think about this. Think of the stones and the Capitol and all the different things we talked about. Videos have emerged of a truck loaded with stones suddenly appearing to drop off its cargo for rioters to use. One such case was reported in Shiraz, after which the unidentified truck suddenly took off. This, along with random attacks involving guns, knives, and improvised explosives, all demonstrate a pattern of well-prepared campaign. But, the truck overlap with the stones, it feels very reminiscent to what's happening to us in this country. And you can make it about like the left somehow doing that. It is illogical when you break down all the information. We're all being played, and it's happening on left and right. It's happening anytime we're calling out the larger agenda, wherever side you think you're on. Anyone pretending this is somehow organic, he writes, now that the unions backing the shopkeepers, their demonstrations, and the original peaceful protest movement's been completely subsided, they've come out publicly and said, look, this is not the same thing. These people are not the protesters. We don't support it anymore. It's very clear, which shows you that a core part of Iranian society does not buy it right now because they've been doing this so lazily, same with Venezuela, for a really long time. So they're already on guard for it or to it. And it says that if you're doing this still and claiming it's organic, then you're pushing cheap propaganda. There are certainly legitimate grievances against the Iranian authorities, but this wave of unrest is not about that. It is a foreign-backed and calculated plot to weaken the government. As noted by Iranian analysts, most of the riots have occurred in locations throughout Iran that are in close proximity to known missile launch sites that just so happen to have also been directly attacked during the 12-day war with Israel last year. No coincidence there, right? That they're just happen to be occurring around all these locations that were strategically important to what Israel bombed before. He also says it's also possible that the unrest around these locations is designed to distract Iranian security forces in those particular areas, allowing professional Israeli employed operatives to prepare for a new round of aggression against the country, which we'll get to in a second. It seems to be what they're pushing right now. An important observation, he writes, about these rioters is that many of them have appeared wearing chains and other expensive clothing items. Indicative of criminal groups, he writes, unlike local residents, by the way, who are typically unable to afford such apparel. This suggests that gangs with ties to Israel or other foreign intelligence agencies may be instigating the bulk of the violence. But ask yourself why many of them, most of the average people aren't able to afford that stuff. It's not because of Iran, guys. It's because of U.S. sanctions and attacks on their finances to a large degree. But thinking about that, it's an interesting point to make. Well, this, our partisan dynamic is always so quick to call out the smallest thing, and rightly so, about things like this, but then fail to consider these kind of dynamics. Under broader implications. Now, this is the big picture thing that I think he just did a really good job breaking down. He says, if the Israeli-U.S. alliance succeeds in what they're doing with every one of these countries, not just Iran and Venezuela, but this is what he's particularly focusing on, in its goal of collapsing the Iranian state, this would result in total domination of the West Asia and prove pivotal to the ambitions of throughout their ambitions throughout Africa. Meaning, obviously, Venezuela is a part of the agenda against Iran and plenty of other things. But if they're able to successfully take that state down, it would change a lot. That's why it's always been a focal point for them for 30 years. Russia and China have for some time been portrayed as representing a resurgence of a Soviet Union-style bloc opposed to the United States, or in other words, the emergence of a multipolar world. Following the U.S. operation against Venezuela and the fall of the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad, it's become clear, and this is not going to make some people happy, that no such multipolar order exists at present. Now, there's many ways to think about that. It could be that they're not able to because of I tend to argue that I don't think any of them truly have the intentions of making themselves somehow bound by other people's interests or somehow less powerful I personally find it hard to believe. The opening possibility of some better dynamic, we should always be open to. But of course, what's interesting is you have an argument about a multipolar dynamic when, again, I don't believe that's really what they're fighting for. I think COVID-19 gave us insights to the larger, deeper coordination to a lot of these groups. But think about that being the argument. And the people in this country, like Alex Jones and all the rest, who have always been calling out globalism and now pretend like they don't know what the word means, or rather they misrepresent what it does mean, are calling them globalists. Well, they're the ones going, no, let's make this multipolar. But over here, you've got the exactly what that would look like being called something else, rolled out by our governments, being spearheaded by the most alarming elitist technocrats in the world who are also Zionists. Right? I mean, think about how weird that is. What I'm trying to highlight so often in this point is that this is happening. Now, look, the word globalism, for example, is such a buzzword. I've pointed to things like this my entire career, or the term New World Order, for example, we use the title. Different than saying the New World Order versus a New World Order, which is a common use of the term. But think about it. These are things that have been discussed. We've talked about it many times, but it wasn't a major focus because there were, right now, I think for the first time, for most people, it's very obvious that you can see what we would call the globalist agenda. It's always been there, but it's become very clear. But my point is that people then today would argue that the term, we talk about it, put it in the title. It's like, oh, they're just getting down, they're caught in that narrative, that rabbit hole. But if you know our work, this is not like we're just trying to tap into some term. We've always been talking about this. The reason I'm focusing on it today is because it is actually finally developing up in front of you to a degree that we can all see. And as always, pointing out the people who feigned fighting that are now the ones pulling punches everywhere. That's, I argue, by design. This is about trying to guide you into the ground when it matters the most. That's what I personally believe. But I'm saying all of that because what's interesting is that we shouldn't shy away, like I said before, whether Zionism or whatever it is, from the obvious. If you have a state, a government, an individual who is claiming that they want to force their agenda, their worldview, their anything over everybody else, there's no better example of that than the U.S. agenda anywhere in the world. Anywhere. Think about that for a second and recognize what the globalist actually is, or what globalism, the order they're building. And it is alarming, and it is being framed under fighting the very thing they claim they're trying to stop. Going forward, it says this became shockingly clear, the idea of their, that will, again, back to the point that there is also, on top of my point, not a multipolar world order in being built alongside of it, or to contest it. which I argue is probably because there really isn't. It's more of another feigned effort to, I hope I'm wrong, quite frankly, not because I believe in the world they're trying to build, but just because I don't believe that it should be a centralized power in any context. But we should question that too. But he's arguing that that's not what's happening. They say this, but then they don't actually back it up, which should be very concerning. So even if you believe in everything they claim in the multipolar dynamic, recognize they're not even doing that in earnest. As he says, this became shockingly clear when the passage of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2803 in November of last year, which authorized the Trump administration's plan to conquer the Gaza Strip and achieve regime change there. Of course, a technocratic agenda, which is literally what they call it, which we'll get into the idea of Delcy Rodriguez being called a technocratic leader or the technocratic world. I mean, they're talking about this right now with Venezuela. I mean, it's crazy that it can be so transparent. They're even using the terms, but then we talk about it, and so much of the conversation reflects it or deflects it, or either just ignores it like some kind of a conspiratorial conversation. It's like this. I think they're already trying to normalize the term itself. It's just very, very clear. But he says the passing of the Security Council, rather Resolution 2803, marked the day when the old international order effectively died. I'm sure others have their, feelings on where that might be, but it's a very good point to think about the way that they handle it. He's making it clear that no meaningful opposition to the U.S.-led world order actually exists on the global stage. That is globalism. That is the U.S. world order that's being built out with the support of the groups we're talking about. That doesn't mean they're the only one trying to do that, but this is an example of that. He writes, this does not mean that Beijing and Moscow are weak, but rather that they are clearly unready, seems like a generous word, I would argue, to assume that major role many analysts had previously suggested. Meanwhile, he writes, the U.S. is transforming itself in order to carve out a new world order. This is being achieved by transferring power to major corporations, billionaires, tech companies, while the government itself focuses on security matters and coordinates a campaign of global control and coercion. The U.S. military is therefore being transformed into the armed wing of major corporations as the concept of national sovereignty and international law collapses. Think about that. I mean, again, that's what they're telling you they're doing. They just don't say it that way in regard to the outcome. But what we're seeing is this public-private partnership, which is what we were fighting with the World Economic Forum, become just like the marching order of this administration. We're seeing them selling these things. We're seeing him with, socialistic, fascistic overlaps, basically blending corporations with the government. I mean, everything you guys were saying you were fighting is playing out in front of you right now. That's why many conservatives are just not buying it anymore. That's important. A campaign of global control and coercion, right? Transferring power over to corporations or billionaires or tech elites or companies themselves. Consequently, the U.S. government will not be the entity investing heavily in foreign projects. Instead, Washington leverages its military might and intelligence agencies to enable corporations to invest in different projects and direct policy on the ground. And that's why that way they're not accountable at all. You got corporate, think Prospera and these different groups on top of that. So it's multiple ways it's happening. One is just seemingly seizing land, but overall, that's not for the government to be involved in, right? That's the idea. Well, military might is what drives it in, like the regime change in Honduras that drove that into reality back in 2009. Another one with the election manipulation just recently. I mean, that's exactly what's happening. It is well understood, he writes, that the government itself is buried in debt and, therefore, multinational corporations are now leading the way. This was a concept first born of the World Economic Forum and the leader, Klaus Schwab, and has since been altered to suit changing global dynamics. But realize, Republicans, if you support what they're doing, you support the World Economic Forum, you support Davos, you support the Great Reset. You need to reconcile that because that's where this comes down to. Ultimately, he writes, even if the U.S. government is to weaken, the corporations will keep their wealth and will be able to control policy. Now, this is interesting because what I think this is outlining is that we're at a point now where they recognize even the idea of government, hopefully, fingers crossed, is beginning to be undermined. The people understand why it shouldn't be what we want. But if you want to take it to something that's not just my mindset, that the people just aren't buying that don't trust the government, don't trust the two-party illusion, right? We're seeing these things break down. So hypothetically, if they think that might amount to them losing power in some way, well, this is an effort to sort of shrug that power off onto corporations that aren't bound by your vote, even if you believe that's what actually happens, or bound by your influence, to make it more accurate. That way, Trump can go, someone else can come in, the government can completely collapse, but they maintain their power. They just shift into the corporate dynamic. Now, it's not as simple as that, but I believe that's part of what this is right now. And he made a really good point with that. All that this new strategy is doing is transitioning from corporations working through middlemen, as it has been forever, to control the direction of U.S. policy, to the corporations directly leading on their own and receiving the support from Washington they need to do so. Now, you could make the same point with lobbying groups, right? But the point is that they've basically sold out to the people who want to pay the highest. And in this case, we also have a very clear overlapping technocratic agenda. They have the AI agenda. So at the end of the day, we've gone from having the Peter Thiels behind the scenes quietly dictating policy to them standing out front, or rather Musk or the rest. It's what this is. In other words, the exact opposite system is merging in the United States and across the West, for that matter, as these are multinational corporations in many cases, from the one that rules from Beijing. Well, in other words, the exact opposite system is emerging in the United States is opposite from the one in Beijing. He says that in China, and this is interesting because people so often try to claim it's one thing, but if you look at the reality of it, it is a capitalist system. And he says in China, a capitalist system is controlled by a strong central government that cannot be lobbied or removed. In the United States, the capitalists have consolidated power and created structures that control that will not change, while the government beneath them is managed by them and allowed to undergo adjustments that they permit. He says, while China is a country, the U.S.'s leadership is now composed of multinational corporations whose power transcends borders and who will never be held to account for their actions. Is that not globalism? Is that not a technocratic global elite? And he says the Chinese people can easily identify their leaders. Most people in the West cannot. Now, that's not to say, I'm sure, and he and I have even talked about this, that China is not taking a similar path. But at the very least, what he's, I think, trying to highlight the most is that we're at a place, whether it feels different or is expressed or defined differently, that we're way further down that path than even China. Whereas China, in the technocratic sense, in regard to technocratic surveillance, is way further ahead, at least as it would appear. And we're catching up quite quickly. But either way, the point comes down to the fact that they're creating a new style of governance, a transition to some kind of corporate public-private partnership, CEO-run country, network states, freedom city, smart city dynamic. And I think it's never been more clear than right now. So I think this all very much relates as he does. I'll include this article as well as this one that is kind of the larger point, the network state coup. And think about that point, right? How that very clearly overlaps with what he was just discussing. It's just one element of how they're trying to transition into that very phase of existence. Now, on top of that, we have the Iran overlap before we get into some other points about military spending. And this is going around right now. And this is what's crazy. I mean, just start with this in general. Well, I mean, right now, as he highlighted in that article, they don't have popular support for this. It's absolutely embarrassing how little support they're getting for this more than ever. Same thing in Venezuela. That's why they have to lie about all this. But here he is. This is yesterday. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former dictator Shah, but as the joke, but apparently he's the crown prince of democracy. I mean, they actually say he's going to bring back democracy, but he's a prince and he's supposed to be the leader because his father was the ruler. But that's democracy, right? Just shut up and follow along. I've trained all my life, he says, to serve my nation. I am more than ready to step into Iran. I will be there for my compatriots to lead the ultimate battle. And Fox News, given the time, just lay this out. Nobody supports this, but they'll still try to force it in, and they may even still win, which is terrifying. That's where we are. Now, right now, 6 minutes ago from when I started anyway, Iran experiencing nationwide internet blackout. It's every single time. And then they just say, oh, they can't manage their infrastructure, like that somehow just perfectly coordinates. No, they're attacking them. We already talked about this. They've already discussed it. They've already gloated about how they do this. They even promoted these things in the past about their cyber attacks. They're attacking it for many reasons, my opinion. One, because they don't want people expressing that they're not buying this, but they also don't want anybody, they want this narrative to take hold. They don't want there to be outside influence. It kind of goes both ways. And at the end of the day, this is an attack. Just more acts of war. On top of that, Trump says the U.S. will strike very hard again if Iran kills protesters. You know, the fact that they do it more than once over a couple of days, like that's a very clear narrative, or rather a message. Go ahead, we'll blame Iran. That's what it feels like. It's what they do every time. On top of that, it's what they've lied about almost every single time. And right now, also the point that everyone seems to be making, and here we are, ICE shooting people in the streets, but that's okay. but we can, I mean, it's so obvious that this is a contradictory stance. And on top of that, that if they'll have any excuse, they will use it to go after them. And that's the worry right now. Iran protests enter 9th day as Trump renews intervention threat. Well, that doesn't appear to be the real picture of the protests. Here's at least, and you'll find many of these, and of course, they could be lying, right? You could check it. It does appear to be accurate update, like recent information in regard to the imagery. He says, these are the most current pictures from today from Iran. Now, this is from today. Pahlavi riot called failed tonight in Tehran. Do not believe the BS of the Pahlavi last dog. That's the Shah's son. They're claiming they're riots and we're overtaking. Remember, the last one they just did that fell flat. There wasn't a lot of momentum. They claimed they were invading Tehran. All the Israeli bots online were screaming how they were taking over Iran. The capital's fallen. Khamenei has fled the capital. All of those were lies. Lies in hopes of tipping the scales in their favor. Didn't work. Here's, of course, Patrick Bet propaganda comes on to let the Shah spill all of his nonsense. That's what they do. And Ryan Razbiani comes on and says, I want to remind Iranians of what Reza Pahlavi said about returning to Iran in 2023. Quote, my life is here in America. My children and everybody I know are here. If I went back to Iran, what would I go back to? Iranians don't want a work from home leader. The reality, guys, is that he's not an Iranian leader. He is a U.S. puppet who happens to be Iranian. If you even want to call it that, with the reality of what his whole background is. But the truth is that this person is not supporting Iran, and you can prove it to yourself. Now, on top of all of that, the war agenda, of the peace president has completely continued to increase in every possible way that should insult you if you bought his original narrative. Here's the White House post from yesterday, and he's just quoting his own statement. I have determined that for the good of the country, especially in these very troubled dangerous times. Of course, that's maybe why they've just created more chaos to justify what they thought you would not want because he promised the opposite. Well, our military budget for 2027 should not be $1 trillion. It should be $1.5 trillion. My God, just a casual $500 billion because, some protests. That was always going to happen. That money is going to Israel and all the rest of the agendas. That's, by the way, not even secret. Trump has been muscling to get more money to Israel, even in the memorandum of understanding that was already at $40 billion over 10 years. They're pushing it. And that, by the way, every time it's gone up has been because of Trump for the most part. Look it up. Now we're increasing the money, right? More money for the military, but we were going to lower costs. We were going to stop military adventurism. We were national first, America first. No, those were all complete lies. And if you somehow just pretend that this is what leads to that, then you're a child. Or you're just out there trying to convince other people, gaslighting people to go along with the narrative. Because that's not the reality. This does not lead to that. It never has. Here is Arnab Bertrand. I typically, you know what? Okay, yeah, I have it right there. He says, I typically don't like to be alarmist, but any student of history will tell you. All the lights are blinking scarlet red. Hold on, wait, let me make sure I didn't. 1 second. I just make sure I didn't miss something here. Right. Okay. So Arnab Bertrand, in regard to this post, said, and this I always appreciate his geostrategic analysis. He says, I typically don't like to be alarmist, but any student of history will tell you all the lights are blinking scarlet red. He says, I mean, massive military expansion, check. Annexation threats all over the place, check. And not even in like some context of security or like, it's just like they say that, but we're just going to seize Greenland or, all these claims. It just, or what they just did with Venezuela, Mexico, it's illegitimate. Demonstrated willingness to use military force unilaterally, check. New imperial doctrine proclaimed, check. Withdraw from international organizations and international treaties, check. At this stage, he says, we're not even watching warning signs anymore. We're watching the thing itself in motion. That's a great way. That's important to think about. These aren't precursors, guys. They're doing it. The only way the world stops this train is to put differences aside and form a balancing coalition. Now, that doesn't have to mean global order or some kind of even multiple. It just means that as a collective of people out there with an interest of recognizing what they're doing, or anybody else doing it for that matter, the UK does similar things, Israel, of simply addressing this and calling it out publicly, and then go from there. Otherwise, he says the dominoes will keep falling one after another. Hope of self-restraint of a rogue great power isn't historically a very successful strategy. Self-restraint requires either institutions now being exited or norms now being shredded. Those are in parentheses. The only thing that can bring it back is fear of consequences. I happen to agree. Now, look, I'm not, naive enough to think that simply by calling it out, look, we're doing that right now. But it is the idea that we don't do anything because that won't change it. That's black pill. That's actually giving up. We should stand up and call this out. Good Morning of Liberty simply says, in regard to his statement about after a long negotiation, more money for the military. He simply says, trust me, bro, there's a little bit more money for the world's most expensive military, bro. Take the $900 billion you spend and raise it by $600 billion. Then I'll shrink the government, bro. We'll start paying down the debt and end the income tax and these tariffs after we lose safe, bro. I promise. Yeah, just what, it's a joke, obviously. Just keep going along. Keep doing the opposite of what we claim. One more step, and it'll all end up happening. Hey, and you know what? Even certainly possible, but highly unlikely. And I think we all know it's not true. On top of that, Murray says, well, everybody's arguing about a few $1 billion of daycare fraud. And I agree with him, which is a problem that should be fixed and needs to be engaged with honestly. The Trump administration wants to increase our military spending by almost $600 billion a year for the same department that's never passed an audit. Think about that. The Pentagon, who has continually failed and then just shucked off the responsibility. And so that billions matters. And by the way, the $9 billion is not even accurate to what they framed it as, but we're okay with $600 billion for unaccountable actions. It's excellent point. And it shows you the problem. Glenn Greenwald says, and here's Pete Hegseth saying 1.5 trillion, peace through strength. It's just the most lazy response. No, it's not peace through strength. It's simply military funding for the military or merchants of death and all the people. Like, you can't say peace through strength while you're funding a genocide, you moron. But he says, President Trump is rebuilding our military, larger, stronger, and more lethal than ever because peace, right? And he says, no denying that Alex Karp, Palantir, Mary Madelson, Bill Ackman, Paul Singer, and tech tycoons are getting all they wanted for financing Trump's campaign. Trump confronting, in quotes, the military-industrial complex and deep state by doubling the already bloated Pentagon budget. Silly. It's worthy of ridicule. Anyone out there acting like that's what they're doing, rebels fighting the deep state, needs to be made fun of. Dave DeCamp just simply points out on top of that, the ongoing Somalia war that no one, after the claims in Israel and Somaliland, well, the U.S. war in Somalia goes on with no media coverage except from AndyWar.com. They've launched another helicopter raid. It's just endless. Endless. And there's no justification other than foreign policy adventurism for seizing of assets, for control for Israel. If you want to go out and talk about the Al-Shabaab overlap, recognize the connections to the larger terrorist industrial complex that they have created and how this all connects. I'm just tired of pretending like we have to debate how obviously they fund terrorism everywhere. It's not even a debatable conversation. It's one of the most provable things out there, but people still push back. And the larger influential people just pretend it's not there. So, as to get into Venezuela more deeply, Orwell points out Trump's hypocrisy in regard to this statement here about more money, more spending for the military. She says, Hong Kong, clown world, right? Don, your words have never meant anything. Now, not now, or ever. I agree. Oh, where were we here? Maybe I didn't grab that. Hold on. And, it's actually pretty incredible how many of these you can find on almost every topic. That's the wild part. You could find them directly contradicting what they claim is the most important thing ever, or what they've always believed, and it just doesn't seem to affect the conversation. This is why, myself included, a lot of us are going through sort of a confounding, not that it should ever be suggested that what we're doing is unimportant. I always think this is valuable, whether or not it's having a larger effect on the ultimate outcome, in the sense of it's just not really they'll still do it anyway. The point, though, is that we have to really reflect on other pathways, right? Or ways that so if we're just out here spinning our wheels and they've recognized a situation or cultivated a situation where that's okay, right? Many of us, you get your moments of awareness and they shove you into the corner and then just gets, new things get built and they just are okay letting you stagnate in the background, right? If that's the case, how do we circumvent that? Right? And this is a conversation we need to have. There's plenty of ideas. Here's the clip of Trump contradicting himself. Where was that? Damn it. There we go.
Going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. Our current strategy of nation building and regime change is a proven absolute failure.
We will break the cycle of regime change.
We must abandon the failed policy of nation building and regime change that Hillary Clinton pushed in Iraq, in Libya, in Egypt, and in Syria. Regime change.
So the question should be asked, did he mean it when he said that? Right? Was that his real policy? And then he just decided to change that for some reason, or was he lying to you then? Because there's only really one of two choices here.
It takes chaos.
You've seen how that works over the last 20 years. That hasn't been too good. Not a reckless interventionist globalism.
Well, look at that. Literally just called it globalism, which now he's doing. You listening, Alex Jones? Make some notes.
We're getting out of the nation building business. We're going to stay until such time as the proper transition can take place.
Pretty clear. So I'll include the last two shows we discussed this. Trump admin illegally attacks Venezuela, arrests Maduro while further pushing regime change in Iran, as well as the recent one, Venezuela fire sale. Was there a deal made with Maduro, and is Delcy Rodriguez playing Trump? And this is something I'm still very much considering, that there's multiple layers to what this is. So starting with this exclusive in post-Maduro Venezuela, U.S. security chief as potential target. I mean, it just shows you so obviously that this is not about anything other than absolute control as long as forever, basically. And that ultimately now that's why we'll get into them selling or only using the money that we like basically through your system that we use through the only U.S. goods, and forcing them to only do certain things or support certain actions. But democracy, but Venezuelan people, it's on its face transparent. And so here we talked about the two people in the military, both the civilian side of the security forces and then the military side. And those two people arguably still being completely in control of what's going on in Venezuela. That was it. And the argument being that Delcy Rodriguez was tapped because a CIA memo told them that she would be the one that would maintain control. And that anybody else, including the people they support, including the one they told you was the actually elected leader, that wouldn't work because they don't have support. So think on the beginning of the point how ridiculous that is. They're the ones talking about democracy and the legitimacy of elections, and we have to make sure that it's the real people, democracy. Okay. And then they go, this guy really won, and we can prove it. Okay. They're lying, but okay, we'll go with that. Then they take Maduro out of the way. And then they go, well, we'll stick with her because, the other guy won't. Okay, well, so right there. Wouldn't it be we just did something illegal, we militarily acted, and with the point we'd have pushed the person in place that you is supposed to be in place and to change the way, and I'm not justifying or calling for that, but how absurdly opposite it is to go in there and then allow people that you claim are part of a terrorist organization to keep running it because that's best for your interest corporate-wise. That's what they're doing. The industry of oil and everything else, that's the rationalization, at least on the surface, that we want to maintain some semblance of what's the word I'm looking for? Just not chaos. And so logically, that even makes sense. But it really shows you that it has nothing to do with anything they claim they're calling for. It's not about democracy. It's not about the people's will. They just want to state those things, then go in and do what makes them money, what allows them control. And that's why it's very much worth asking whether Delcy might have made an agreement. Or even more so, whether she might have done what she had to not be removed, and now she's playing Trump with these two people at the wings. So that's why now, on top of what I just said, now they're coming out and going, you better be careful, you guy, we might come take you too. It's insane, guys. And this is a person who is arguably elected, who is part of the previous administration, and on top of that, who is allowed to be there now post what just happened. Right? So they take Maduro and they go, okay, now let's get this moving. She's in charge. Okay. And then come back and go, wait, we don't like what you just said. Hold on. That's not the right policy. But democracy, it's worthy of ridicule, guys. And it just shows you what they really are. And this is only about profiteering and control. And just to be clear, I'm in no way suggesting that this person is a good guy or, who knows? At the end of the day, these people in government are always pretty shady, in my opinion. The Trump administration has put Venezuela hardline interior minister on notice that he could be at the top of a list of targets unless he helps interim President Rodriguez meet U.S. demands. Right. In other words, that means Venezuelan interest of the people, what U.S. demands, and keep order following the toppling of Maduro, according to people familiar with the matter. His name is Diosdado Cabello, who controls security forces accused of widespread human rights abuses. So even right there, who knows if it's accurate? But the point is, they've accused him of human rights abuses. But let him stay, though, because that just works for everybody's dynamic. So they don't really care about human rights abuse. They don't really care about terrorism as they fund and work with those people. You know, common thread here, guys, is one of a handful of Maduro's loyalists on top of that. But that's okay, because Maduro's a terrorist, but that guy we're going to keep because he works for our interests. That Donald Trump has decided to rely on temporary rulers to maintain stability during transition periods. Said one briefed on their thinking. U.S. officials are especially concerned that Cabello, given his record of repression and a history of rivalry with Rodriguez, could play the spoiler and are seeking to force his cooperation, even as they look for ways to eventually push him out of power into exile. Just think about how wild that is. Said the source, speaking on condition of anonymity, so who knows? But the idea seems to line up with what they do. So they might just decide to push him out later. And how long does that go on? A year? 10 years? Forever is the point, guys, because they do it everywhere whenever they want. So we don't like what he's doing today, so we'll kick him out of the way. But right now, they're continuing to act like it's an extension of the operation. Realize this is what they do everywhere, all the time, to anybody they don't like. They just do it, at least they used to do it, quietly. In the meantime, it says they have communicated to Cabello via intermediaries that if he is defiant to U.S. interests, obviously, he could face a similar fate to Maduro, which we don't even know what that ultimately is just yet. The authoritarian leader captured in a U.S. raid on Saturday and whisked away to New York to face prosecution, because that's not ridiculous at all, or could see his life in danger, said the source. Right, so we're threatening death as well. But talking to Cabello could be risky, possibly motivating pro-government motorcycle groups known as colectivos to take to the streets, unleashing the chaos Washington wants to avoid. Their reaction may depend on whether they feel protected by the officials. Okay, so let's just say they maintain secure semblance of normalcy so they can export oil and make lots of money. Doesn't that then very clearly mean that the collectivos and the terrorist administration, as they claim it, is still completely in charge, or at least in power? Yes, as always, they don't care if terrorists are in charge. And again, that's not what I'm calling them, just their perspective. They'll work with the ISIS and Al-Qaeda groups. They'll fund the people that they claim they're fighting every which way, Hamas or anybody else, because that's what they do. It's actually their model, guys. Oh, wait, it says, all right, okay, continuing. Rodriguez later announced the appointment of Calixto Ortega, former president of a central bank, as vice president of economy. So plenty of things we've already discussed on top of things like that and what they do going forward, the amenable actions. She's already showing very clear, I guess, willingness to allow them to come in and exploit the country. But I'm still waiting to see how this plays out. But right now, I'm not feeling hopeful about it. And you could even argue that's just because she just doesn't want to be murdered, which is certainly something to consider. But I'm questioning, and I want your thoughts, whether you feel that she is double crossing maybe screwed over Maduro. Or maybe the original agreement that they Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal reported on, that Maduro was in fact behind the scenes discussing some sort of transition into exile, that maybe that he was double crossed and that's why he's still in prison. Or maybe they made that whole thing up. This is where we have to really be, guys, because this is what happens every time. Cultivating these narratives, we have to wait for the evidence. It says also on the list of potentials, of course, is the defense minister. So basically, as I said, and we called this out in the beginning, the two people who seem to be actually in charge of everything are the ones they now focus on. That is another point to maybe makes the suggestion that she's pulling away from them. And they recognize it's because those two people are actually in control. But it says it's under U.S. drug trafficking indictments and has a multi-million-dollar bounty on his head. But we'll let him rule for now because democracy. This remains a law enforcement operation, and we are not done yet, said the United States Department of Justice. Okay, so where's the conclusion? What's the end goal? They'll never get into it because this is what they are everywhere all the time. It's an ongoing operation to every country, every leadership, every point. Whenever they go afoul of what we want, legal stuff, democracy. A senior Trump administration official declined to answer Reuters specific questions, but said in a statement, quote, the president is speaking about exerting maximum leverage with the remaining elements in Venezuela and ensuring they cooperate with the United States by halting illegal migration, stopping drug flows, revitalizing oil infrastructure, and doing what's right for Venezuelan people. So the immigration part is not even being, the idea that we pretend that anything other than their sanctions and their attacks have driven people in the United States, which you can quite literally prove, on top of the manipulation of that by other powers we've discussed. If the argument that somehow is a decision that like they said that Biden was allowed, it's just a joke, guys. Everything they're doing is so transparent right now. So by saying halting immigration, well, that stops the moment you stop sanctioning and destroying the country, which is what they're already starting to do to some degree. So there you go. Self-fulfilling prophecy, stopping drug flows. It barely exists in the first place. If you want to look at an international dynamic, it's easy to prove. Revitalizing oil infrastructure, that's really the point of this net right now, is letting us come in and exploit and steal and destroy the country even further. And what's right for the Venezuelan people, any of the things they're doing are the opposite. So really, they're just saying, let us come in and take what we want. And I'm waiting to see what she does. The administration has decided Venezuela's opposition, led by Maria Machado, would be unable to keep the peace at a time when Trump wants enough calm on the ground to jumpstart access for oil companies. See, pretty clear what's happening. And so it doesn't matter that we claim they were elected and that the people wanted them. But we're going to say not those people because we want something. How much more clear can this get? It's sort of like when we get into the point in a second about claiming Maduro worked for the cartel of the Suns or whatever. And he's a drug trafficker. And then, oh no, we admit that never really happened. But we're past it now. Move on. They know, guys, and they know we know. At this point, it's a mirage, and it's whether we choose to push back. He says, continuing to access to the vast oil reserves and to avoid having to put U.S. forces on the ground. Too late. It's already happening. Trump instead has embraced a classified CIA assessment that concluded Maduro's top aides would be best suited to run the country. On an interim basis, of course, which then means they can come in and change whenever they want. So if they let them be in power for the next 20 years, they can always argue, well, we only said it was an interim basis. But the administration wants to eventually see a move towards new elections, though the time frame remains unclear. Yeah, that's setting lightly, seeing as how they basically insinuated it could go on forever. Trump has offered no clear explanation of how Washington would oversee Venezuela after the biggest U.S. intervention in Latin America since 1989 invasion of Panama. Critics have condemned it as neocolonialism, a violation of international law. I mean, this is what I always say, find so funny. From a platform like Reuters, well, you guys have minds. You have people who can read books. Is it or is it not a violation of international law? Critics condemn it as well, it is that. It's quite literally by the definition of the words. But, just how I would see it. The U.S. wants to see progress towards meeting U.S. objectives in a matter of weeks, sources said. Do what we want right now because freedom and democracy. Beyond threats of further military action, the U.S. could use Rodriguez's finances as leverage because that's legitimate. They're talking about using her financial situation and claiming that she's basically saying that she's illegally doing something through Qatar. Qatar denies that. But let's realize what that overlaps with. Israel. That's not even secret. And so interestingly enough, that could be more than it seems, but I'm waiting to see how that plays out. U.S. authorities and their intermediaries are also seeking to co-opt other Venezuelan officials and those at levels below them to open the way for government that will acquiesce to Washington interests. It's very transparent. Quiet part out loud. But what that tells me, if that's accurate, if they're right now trying to co-opt other people, they're not in control. And I do think that's the case, whether or not Delcy has sold somebody out or working with them. It's pretty clear based on everything we've seen, with not knowing that some of it could be inaccurate, that those two people were clearly still in charge. And that maybe they felt Delcy was on their side. Maybe they didn't care. It's hard to say at this point. But with the fact that they're trying to get more, that shows me that they're trying to vie for more position. Trump's advisors see Rodriguez as a linchpin, a technocrat. That's what they wrote, a technocrat, who they believe is amenable to working with the U.S. on a transition and oil-related issues, according to people briefed by the U.S. about the U.S. strategy. So U.S. officials, people behind them are talking about this, calling her a technocrat. That's not even the only example, guys. Now, look, the word is used. The word has a definition. It doesn't only mean the worrisome thing that we see it as. I mean, technically it does, but I'm not misrepresenting the term. But you could argue it just means a technical, a scientific, technological expert in their field. It can be used in that kind of broad sense. or rather, I guess, more specific sense, the broad sense being sort of what we're discussing. But I find it fascinating. The world is very aware of this conversation. Trump has talked about this point. So when they make that term used for that, or use it to talk about the new Gaza Freedom City, it's just, I think it's on purpose. So on top of that, Orwell shared this with me. This is a video. Maduro is gone. Now what in Venezuela? This is from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which we've talked about many times over the years, the CSIS. This is Dr. Ryan Berg, director of the Americas Program and head of the Future of Venezuela Initiative at the CSIS. Just a quick point. Here's what he says about, where was it again? There we go. A more technocratic, about Rodriguez. So that is 252. Let's check this out.
Continuation of de facto vice president becoming president is someone with whom we can work, and someone who is more pragmatic, less ideological, more technocratic, someone we can work with.
So interesting, right? I mean, what do you think they're even trying to use that term for? I mean, in this context, like, it sounds like they're just trying to create the, in a general, whether it's intentional here or not, into just like a technical expert. But there is a part of that means that, but it doesn't even seem to apply here. Why would she be more technocratic other than willing to align herself with that agenda, willing to allow a technocratic transition? I mean, because if you look at the reality of her background and look at what she's doing, I don't see an example of what that word means other than the larger point. I mean, I get the sense that's being used to make this case, like to normalize the idea, to make it about here's the good technocratic groups now taking control for democracy. I don't know. I just think it's very relevant that these terms are now being used to define the person they want to be in power in yet another regime change, while technocracy seems to be overtaking everything. Personally, find that very relevant. Listen one more time.
It is the de facto, not the de jure president that we recognize as legitimate, but the de facto vice president becoming president is someone with whom we can work, and someone who is more pragmatic, less ideological, more technocratic.
And again, that's the point he just made. That's the logic there. That, yeah, we know that we've been screaming about that person being the legitimate president. I know we told you that they robbed them and that they stole it from them and that should be in power. But, this one makes better sense for us right now. This one works better for our agenda. And I mean, why don't people laugh about that? I'd be like, well, then you're ridiculous. Then you're a hypocrite, right? Didn't you just get done telling us that now it doesn't matter because your interests? Yes, guys. Yes. It's never been more clear. It's always in front of you. So thank you, Orwell, for sharing that. Continuing. Evan Loves Wharf points out the weird change of this conversation. Reuters posts, U.S. may subsidize oil companies to rebuild Venezuela's energy infrastructure. And don't forget, they've already made it clear that possibly could come out of your tax dollars. This is how ridiculous is this. It's about gangs, right? Oh, wait. It's about fentanyl, actually. No, it's cocaine. Sorry, we meant cocaine. Actually, they stole our oil. No, you're going to pay for the oil. Wow, quite a swing in that conversation. It's embarrassing. Well, on top of that, the drug overlap, we saw Alex Witkoff, right? We made that point where he very clumsily tried to make the argument that somehow because somebody I figure it was somebody he related to, died of an Oxycontin overdose, that therefore Maduro, Venezuela. Yeah, he missed the boat on that one, guys. That it's just a lazy, and I think even they blocked him, so he probably can't post it now. We showed it on the show last time. I think it was the last show. Oh, it's right here. Here we go. They even Twitter fact checked him, saying, no, he died from an Oxycontin overdose. Oxycontin was developed by Purdue Pharma. By the way, the Sackler family, who was basically given a financial slap on the wrist. Well, that's the wrong way to say that. They were charged a lot of money, but it was a slap on the wrist because they made 10 times that in that year alone. They know that, by the way. But he came out and made this big case about how, oh, thank God, Trump saved us from... And then everybody called him out, and he went on a blocking spree. He's got community noted, and he was embarrassed. But that's what happens today, guys, because the whole world's waking up. Ron Paul, one of the people they wanted you to think they were going to work with, one of the people they wanted to pretend like Massey and everybody else. No, they lied to you because they know what we actually want. That's actually not a good point. It shows you that most people, conservatives or anybody, actually want the good thing. Ron Paul says the case against Nicolas Maduro hinged on the Trump administration's designation of Cartel de los Sols as a terrorist drug organization with Maduro in charge. Remember, they couldn't stop talking about it. Bondi and Noam, and they were all saying the same thing. Well, if you haven't caught wind of it already, they've now officially admitted that wasn't real. And I mean, that's exactly the reality. Not only just because the indictment didn't mention any of it, but they've actually been forced to acknowledge that it didn't exist. How ridiculous is that? And to me, if you want to stand back even further, that's incompetence. You can't manufacture a lie that doesn't just fall apart at your feet. That's embarrassing. The operation looks he says, the operation looks like not much more than a big payoff to Trump's donors, including vulture capitalist Paul Singer, who stands to make billions. So here's what's interesting. Somebody comes out, myself included, and says, Zionist Paul Singer stands to wildly benefit from they go, oh, you hate Israel. Yo, you're so racist. Okay, you can lie about that all you want. Here is Ron Paul and plenty of others who simply make the argument, here's a guy who stands to benefit wildly. Is he still racist too? It matters the guy's a Zionist. He's actually publicly discussing that. What's funny is it's so easy for people to dismiss certain things. As I keep pointing out, it is central to the argument. And Daniel McAdams, he'll make these points. It's just important to see that framing because that is the reality. They lied to you. Benjamin Norton simply points out this data about the UN and Afghanistan. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime shows how under the U.S. military occupation, under Trump's administration, by the way, as well, and others, Afghanistan became the world's top producer of opium, used to make heroin. After the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan, opium production suddenly collapsed. Now, there's much more to this story. This is just Seth saying the biggest drug cartel that ever existed was the U.S. client state in Afghanistan, backed by the special forces and the CIA that produced about 15 metric tons of pure heroin from 2001 to 2021. Note how that spans through Trump and Biden's administration. Couldn't be more clear. And we've never heard one word about where the money went because Trump cares, right? It's just obvious. Now, I'll include the article here that I put up back in 2016, Operation Enduring Freedom, the United States opium trade. It's very clear, guys. And the truth of it is obvious. Like, not just because of images of them guarding poppy fields, but the reality of what happened. The Taliban basically near removing the field, which was very actually easy to prove. Not the operations, right? The opium trade. And then the moment the U.S. occupied, that trade exploded by 90%. And so too did almost exactly with it, the world trade. Almost identical to it, the increase of opioid in this country. It's not a secret, guys. You don't need to ask me. It's very clear how that connects. And then, as he points out, the moment they left, even though they didn't really technically leave, but they stopped their influence over all of this, well, it completely went down. Look at that. Guys, I mean, we are being gaslit by everybody. It's time to wake up. What, do you like being a fool? I'd rather play it as a fool? I certainly do not. I guarantee the honest people in this country, left and right, do not like being made a fool. Stand up and start being honest about what's happening and stop playing the partisan game, or we're never going to come back from this. Camilla points this out in regard to Venezuela. Now, there's a ton that happened, by the way. The bombing of different locations, apparently a mausoleum from Chavez. Like, these are deliberate. This is exactly what Israel's doing in Gaza while they claim targeted operations. It's basically the same policy right now. Confirmed, the United States completely destroyed a vital scientific and academic center in Venezuela. See how similar this is? How long until they start bombing hospitals? On Saturday, January 3rd, now I'm kind of being facetious because I hope it's not an ongoing bombing campaign. I feel like they've got what they want at the moment, but the reality being the way that they frame these things, the way that they conduct their policy, it seems like one group, guys. On Saturday, January 3rd, facilities at the Mathematics Center of the Venezuelan Institute of Scientific Research were destroyed in the U.S. bombing attack on Venezuela. Remember when they told you there was just targeted actions to get Maduro out of the way? They lied to you. And you could prove that with your eyes because you could look at how they bombed and it proved that in and of itself. These locations were destroyed in the U.S. bombing attack. The center is part of the National University of Sciences, Dr. Humberto Fernandez Moran. The attack has been described as total. These areas housed servers and essential equipment for computer networks that were completely devastated. This was clearly not just what they claimed. 2 missiles directly hit the area, leaving fragments that show imperial hatred against Venezuela's sovereign technological development. In addition to the completely destroyed mathematics center, 4 more research centers of the institute were affected. Physics Center, Chemistry Center, Ecology Center, and the Nuclear Technology Unit. These spaces have been fundamental in training the professionals who support health, engineering, and oil sovereignty. And the video will break this down. Ryan Grimm, in regard to the media coverage, and just showing you yet again how the current Trump administration, but in case you missed the point, so too did everyone before that, hate you as Americans if you dare call them out. Because here we're talking about journalists, or anybody for that matter. You're a journalist if you decide to be, despite the claims of what they do with corporate media. Supreme Court has roundly upheld the reality of that. You don't need some credential. You don't need some, you just need to choose to cover things, okay? So when you put some information out, even if it was given to you, leaked or otherwise, if that proves a crime, like this very clearly was a crime, then that's not illegal to put out. You're protected by the Whistleblowers Act. And by the way, it shouldn't be anyway, seeing as how it's information Americans have a right to know. Representative Anna Paulina Luna, despite her momentary pretending to fight against, to promote the Epstein files coming out, even though she's an absolute team player, my subpoena to call Seth Harp to testify before Congress for his actions in doxing a Delta Force commander and leaking in classified information regarding a Venezuela mission, Operation Absolute Resolve, has passed unanimously with support from both Democrats and Republicans out of committee. Yep, because they all hate you and none of them want you to call out their military adventurism. Putting a service member in their family in danger, which I don't believe is what happened here, in dishonorable and feckless. What's dishonorable and feckless is murdering people for your imperial agenda. That's what's feckless. Leaking classified information demands explanation and criminal investigation. Seth Harp will be held accountable for his actions. So trying to hold somebody accountable for breaking information about your illegal operations is authoritarian. Ryan Grimm says reporters don't leak classified information. We publish it, right? I mean, think about that. That's a good point. The leak comes from the people giving it to you. They publish information per the rights given to all Americans under the First Amendment. Why do you hate America? You just have to realize how very deliberately they're trying to reorganize everything that we are. It's not just about the larger network state. It's everything, guys. They are transitioning everything. Now, to make that even more clear, just a very clumsy effort by Rick, was it Rick Scott, right? Is that his name? Probably not. What is his name again? I'm forgetting his name all of a sudden. You remember me in the chat what his name is. All these people are the same to me, quite frankly. But here he is from, was it Texas? I forget now. But he says, U.S. Senator says, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Colombia will be next. Democracy's coming back to the hemisphere. What a clown. Let me play it first.
Proud of what the president did, and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and everybody, our military, Maria Corina Machado, and what they did in Venezuela is going to change Latin America. This is the start of changing Venezuela.
It is Rick Scott. Right, but okay, the only confounding point here is that that's not the person that you guys have put in charge, though. So keep pretending like that makes sense. And I don't support any of them, by the way. I support the people that Venezuela wants in that place.
And we're going to fix Cuba. Nicaragua will get fixed. Next year, we'll get a new president in Colombia. We're going to start. The democracy is coming back to this hemisphere.
So the president.
I mean, they're unabashedly telling you that we are going to alter people's dynamic in countries that we don't like. They're not even hiding that right now. Rubio, Miller, I mean, they're coming out hot about this. That's what superpowers do. No longer are we going to cow away from other people. From the law, he calls it international niceties. That's what Miller called international law. These people are monsters, guys. Now look at what I said. This is what's important to think about, how funny and obvious this is. Right, because democracy, which is what they're calling this, as he just said, democracy's coming back. Because democracy is obviously means using military power to force in the regime most willing to sell out their own country and exploit their own people for the benefit of a small group of billionaires. Democracy, right? And then, of course, America. We're a joke right now. Rather, they are making us a joke. Our government who pretends to represent us. It's quite alarming with how cavalierly they can just state what we would otherwise call terrorism or criminal activity if any other government was doing it. Angelo points this out. U.S. demands Venezuela cut ties with Russia, China, Iran, Cuba. How does this make sense? It's the same point. Why would they get to decide what Venezuela can do? So let's just say they claim democracy, okay? Let's just even say it's the interim group. You telling them what they can and can't do and who they can work with and what they can sell to is simply, as Rubio tries to claim, we're not controlling the country. We're just dictating policy. Yeah, bud, that's controlling the country, which you're hoping people are too dumb to recognize that. I mean, I know you guys have cultivated some pretty stupid people around you, but most Americans, conservatives included, liberals included, see what you're doing. Demanding they cut ties with foreign countries is illegitimate. It is illegal occupation. It is colonialism. It is everything we've talked about, because that is not your choice. Even with the puppet government you put in place, if that's what's happening. Now, I just for genuine time, I think I want to, you can read more of it. The point is simply that they're demanding that they do what they say. Here, DD Geopolitics says this is psychotic. Trump is openly announcing that after the kidnapping of Maduro, Venezuela will now be forced to spend its oil revenue exclusively on American products. So you're taking control of their industry, exploiting that for your benefit with your companies, and then saying, whatever we kick down to you, you then have to turn around and give back to us through some kind of a sale. That is grifting, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, that's completely illegitimate. I don't even think I need to explain it. All you've done is create a basic, like a feedback loop, like an illusion of some kind of functioning government where you're dictating every outcome and you benefit from every movement. Venezuela sells its oil. The money's recycled back to the United States. The U.S. controls the grid, medicine, agriculture, and energy infrastructure. Compliance is enforced through sanctions, blockades, and implicit threats of force, but otherwise known as democracy, right? And here's what Trump says. This is the White House account. Venezuela is going to be purchasing only American-made products with the money they receive from their new oil deal. Isn't that embarrassing, right? So yeah, you've got China, who was attempting to make deals. Whether they're using their power to get a better position or not, I'm sure they did. Then Trump comes in and basically kidnaps the leader, forces people in power they want, and then says, you have to do it this way, and then calls it a deal. I mean, guys, that's pathetic. This guy would make fun of this in other contexts. If this was, what is the show? Whatever. If he was on one of his shows, he would fire the person framing it that way, because that's bad. His books will tell you, you don't just call it something. He is doing the criminal thing and just claiming it's something else. That's not crafty. I'll even give Trump credit where it's due. He's way more crafty than that. I've seen in the past pretty deceptively frame things in a way that actually sound like it makes sense. So I ask, who's driving this? Why would he be so blatantly hypocritical? You know what I think. I just want you to ask those questions, because it does not seem to line up with what they've done before, other than the actions being belligerent. My point is that even he is more crafty than that. James Surowecki points out one final time, this is not something the Trump administration is allowed to do. Lisa, how do we pronounce that last name? Breaking. Trump administration plans to put money that they're raising from the seizure of that Venezuelan oil into bank accounts apparently outside the U.S. Treasury. Gee, I wonder if that involves a foreign country. They told lawmakers today, per multiple sources familiar. Sources said they understood that these are as similar or decidedly offshore accounts. Think about how crazy that is. That is straight up criminal activity being framed as okay because it's the government, which is pretty much what they do every day right now. Now, this is preliminary. Obviously, when it comes out like this, they don't want it to. They'll come out and call it a lie, even though half the time it later happens. Or they might shift direction, but realize this is what we've come to expect from them. And as James says, this is not something they're even allowed to do, but that doesn't stop them anywhere else. There is no provision in the Constitution or U.S. law that permits the president to put any government money into bank accounts outside the Treasury or to spend money Congress has not appropriated. Think about how much you want to bet this ends up in the hands of their allies, Israel's bank account, and Trump's friends and his family. I'm kind of not even joking about that. This is so wildly criminal. And the Mafia Don, as Aaron Mate frames it, the Mafia Don doctrine. I'm just going to read it for you because I can't stand to listen to Tom Cotton whine right now. Quiet part out loud. Cotton confirms blockade goal to harm Venezuelan civilians. He says the lights are literally going to go off, which they just did in Iran, by the way. Don't miss that. They're not going to be able to pay policemen or firefighters or teachers unless they begin to cooperate with us. They're unabashedly criminals right now. We're going to force in, but because we're inherently good and right and moral, even though that's not true, whatever we do, even through violence and criminal activity and straight up murder, is still good because we're a good guy. It's sort of like when they framed nuclear power and oil as being green under the Biden administration because, well, we do it for freedom. You don't get that that's exactly the same mindset? That's how they see it, or rather they lie to you about it. James Lee. Just recently, Matt Walsh was against U.S. intervention in Haiti, right? Which is clearly in the Western Hemisphere. However, here he is all of a sudden invoking the Monroe Doctrine to justify intervention because, as James Lee writes, and I agree, but I don't think we can prove that, his boss Shapiro told him so. I mean, this Matt Walsh, people like this are just, they always act like they're so, look, that's all personal opinion. At the end of the day, he's being a hypocrite. You either have a principle or you don't. You either stand against regime change, Tim Pool, or you don't. And all of you guys right now are showing yourselves to be feckless, complete hypocrites. But that's nothing new to me. We've been calling people out for a long time. On top of that, here's from today, the U.S. could run Venezuela for years, says Trump. Of course, because that's what we expected. It's not surprising at all. Only somebody who is naive and ignorant of their previous actions would think that that wasn't going to be the case. Here we are. Money exchanged while allowing people that they told you were bad guys to run the country. That's different. That's the same as everywhere else. Now, this is embarrassing for her, isn't it? More so, Tulsi Gabbard, because of this. U.S. spy chief Gabbard's been excluded from Maduro plans over the past views. So not only is she being boxed out from her team because she has previous stances that they don't like, but she's also sold out recently to maybe gain back. She's sold out entirely over being this benched side, somebody who is a token on their team. I hope she is upset with herself. I hope she comes out and calls out herself. I might even gain back some support from me if she came out and was like, straight up was like, I made a mistake. I should have done this. I thought I could do good by the end of it. And by, blah, blah, blah. I probably would never support her in the long run, like any of them. But at the end of the day, I would call out why I thought that was brave. I highly doubt that will ever happen. But just realize the White House has cut Director of National Intelligence. That's what, think about what, that's crazy. The Director of National Intelligence, one of the highest positions, cut out of months of Venezuelan planning due to her previous beliefs. Aides are now joking DNI stood for do not invite. Think about that. Think about how upset she must be right now. And I think deservedly so. I hope she's really, really disappointed in herself. Here's what she said back in 2019. The United States needs to stay out of Venezuela. Let the Venezuelan people determine their future. We don't want other countries to choose our leaders. So we have to stop trying to choose theirs. And now she recently came out and was like, yay, Trump, for what he did. Basically, I went over it in the last show. It's just pathetic, guys. I have a lower opinion of someone like this than I do of somebody who is bombastically bad about, openly doing the wrong thing because at least they own their actions. Makes me sad. Now, one overlapping point to this, we're not going to get into this in depth today, but just to keep this in mind as we go into the ICE discussion. As Jenny Cohen recently pointed out, over the whole network state connection to Venezuela, she says, look who's circling Venezuela. This is back from December 2025. During his interview with Maria Corina Machado, Palantir co-founder Joe Lonsdale tells her, quote, we have a lot of friends here who've had to flee Venezuela and who are huge fans of yours. And we're very excited to come back and invest and build. And with you when you get to be a free country. Palantir co-founder Lonsdale posted his interview. This is where I got the clip she posts. And the other points we've gone into, the larger point simply, and I think I included a thread right here, of Mark Lutter and the conversation of funding a charter city in Venezuela. Should they get the transition they want, which I think that's what we're dealing with right now. It's like every one of these conversations. Now, very well may not be the main point. Maybe that's a byproduct of the larger geostrategic agenda. But this is part of it. And so what's interesting is that he is involved with the overlap. Here's our, kind of overlap of all of it. What do Venezuela, Greenland, Honduras, Nigeria, Freedom Cities have in common? The network state cabal, Andreessen, Lonsdale, Peter Thiel. Here's a thread. But here's drop site news. Palantir co-founder Joe Lonsdale, and this is from the 6th of January this year, has publicly endorsed a post calling for the extermination of commies, responding exactly and asking, what do you think founding Palantir was supposed to be about on Twitter? Apparently killing leftists. The comment was posted in response to a tweet that stated leftists, quote, should be blown up along with their grave sites. Language explicitly advocating mass violence for political beliefs. Lonsdale's remark reinforces longstanding criticism of Palantir as a firm aligned with militarism, counterinsurgency, and political repression. Palantir software is widely used by the U.S. and the Israeli military, various intelligence agencies, and police departments, Gotham, for example, in the United States, as well as other foreign security forces. Now, I've always pointed this out. I'm not of the mind that these people, they endorse libertarianism, for example. I don't believe they're libertarians. So in this case, when he's going, go after the leftists, and they're, like they were doing this in the previous administrations because I think they were trying to align with the current Trump momentum. Right. So my point is, I think they would align with pretty much whatever would get them in the position they're in. But of course, that's for you to decide. I could be wrong. This is simply saying that, whatever it is, he's saying this publicly, driving the idea. And here we are today with what's happening in this country as Palantir is being used to facilitate what effectively is carrying this kind of action out. Now, it's not just leftists. That's the narrative in many ways, but clearly there's Republicans, there's U.S. veterans on the Republican side. There's all kinds of people who are being attacked, arrested, deported, many of which are U.S. citizens in those conversations. And these people are behind that or driving that through the technology, through the Trump administration. I just found that very relevant that he's expressing a mindset to basically blow up along with their grave sites leftists in general or exterminate commies who have different ideas. That's what he's expressing. So keep that in mind as we go through and the Great Palantir Reset or the Palantir World Order conversation about how they used immigration and their surveillance, or rather immigration, to justify their surveillance state that they built on top of everything else. So what we know, one day after the killing of Renee, good. Oh, and I wanted to point out early that I don't think I grabbed it. There is a circulation of a white woman with a child going around that's not her. Typical partisan nonsense of both sides, by the way. So, January 8th, this is today. Now, we're going to go over some of these points, then we're going to go over some, I think, very important breakdowns of the dishonesty of the evidence at hand. Now, Noam said the shooting occurred after protesters in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by the way. I mean, do we just not find that incredibly coincidental that they've been screaming about these very points, these very locations? And is it not also very obvious that every time that happens, whatever it is, Elon Musk screaming about Haiti, right? Them's talking about Minnesota or whatever it is, Somalia, all of a sudden, when they do that, all of a sudden, the next agenda just happens to align with that location. The next event that takes place organically just happens to be in line with what they were pointing to. Must just be a continual nonstop coincidence, right? Now, I'm not even suggesting anything more than just that there's some, I don't know. That's an opinion. But I find it near impossible that every time, it could just be, to make it simple, that they choose to focus these locations on organic events while ignoring others because they're talking about it. But I think we know it's typically more than that. Noam said the shooting occurred after protests in Minneapolis harassed and impeded ICE agents on Wednesday, and that the officer acted to protect himself and fellow officers. We'll get into the illegitimacy of the lies around all of this. She alleged that Good's actions amounted to an act of terrorism. Now, we'll show you the video. Realize this is a person who is American, who is monitoring what they're doing because what they're doing is constantly being shown to be illegal. I'm going to go over the many times they've already been caught lying about being run over and opening fire on people. 4 that I can prove to you, by the way, of literally being caught lying about what just happened to justify shooting, in some cases, almost killing somebody. Think about how crazy that is. Or the example, you could ask Grok if it makes you feel better, McLaughlin or Noam being caught literally lying about what they say is happening, about who shot where, or who was involved, or what they were carrying, or whether they tried to run, or what side of the border they were on. Over and over and over, they keep getting caught lying in court, and we just don't I mean, we'll get into it. It's just confounding to me. It's wild how clear it is. Or the lack of training, the people they're hiring, and then wondering why you have monsters out there opening fire because Noam says, do what you want, we'll support you. Put masks on, don't serve warrants, don't identify yourselves. I mean, guys, this is everything we're fighting. But an act of terrorism. So the point was that you have them breaking the law everywhere, so they're being monitored. In many cases, maybe they're going too far and deserve to be charged with a crime. Just an obvious point. But in this case, and in fact, I haven't seen examples of that, to be quite honest. I'm sure they exist. But here, you have a person who's doing that, and all of a sudden, let's just even say everything they said is true. All of a sudden, she rams the guy with a car. Okay, fine, that's a crime. If that's what happened, it's not. That would be a crime. Why would that, in any world, taking everything they've laid out, even the lies, amount to domestic terrorism? You know why? Because it's assumed, or rather they want you to assume, that it's a lefty thing, that means Antifa, that means terrorism, like this assumption on assumption on assumption that amounts to domestic terrorism as they then work with terrorists everywhere in the world. It's just kind of sad, right? Because by the meaning of those words, that's not terrorism by any stretch of the imagination, unless you somehow can prove. I mean, even the idea of Antifa, we already showed you that they can't even materialize an argument for what it is, where it's from, who's in charge. It's pathetic. But even say that, at least prove that, but they won't because that's not there. This is just desperation. I mean, think about this, and I mean it. Ultimately, you have a person that shot somebody, and a U.S. citizen, which appears to be the first obvious example. What are they going to do? You're not going to come out and be like, oopsie. You're going to lie because Trump has told you to never admit it. Never admit, deny, deny, deny. It's what they've always done. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, in NPR's Morning Edition, said that he disagrees with Noam's characterization of Good as a domestic terrorist. Now, I think it matters for some people, whether one person or not is a Democrat or Republican. It shouldn't. It should matter what the facts show. So the person is, this is a person in Minnesota who's simply saying from the government that he doesn't agree with it. And he says, quote, she was a compassionate neighbor trying to be a legal observer on behalf of her immigrant neighbors. That's what she was doing at the moment of her death. And she was a poet. She was a mom. She was a daughter. And I'm deeply saddened by what happened to her and her family. Now, the Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said, quote, having seen the video myself, which I'll show you, I want to tell everybody that this is BS. So let's watch. Oh, and I just wanted to point this out. Interesting. That was what I was saying a second ago. This is from December 31st, right? Parsing the rhetoric around the Minnesota childcare fraud. Isn't it just a little bit ridiculous that this just happened and over-focusing for plenty of obvious reasons, and then this happens? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'm not suggesting that this was planned or organized. I just think it's weird that always seems to happen. Maybe just because they choose to pluck out events from where they want you to look. It's still not organic, right? Somali fraud pivot. We discussed this on January 1st. You can check out our show. Now, here is Fox News. Photos released of Renee Nicole Good, who was the person who was killed. The U.S. citizen killed by ICE in Minnesota. Just here's her picture here. You know, a white, born in the United States American. Not that that should mean anything more to anybody being killed. It's a human being, whether they are immigrants, whether they're born somewhere else, whether they have a different religion. But the problem is that it seems to matter more to certain people. Right? So right now, the idea that a U.S. citizen was killed should be huge. But it's almost unnerving how much they're just trying to brush it away as if it's just justified because they drove at me. It's just wild to me. Like, more than most things I've seen. This is, I think, because of what they've allowed to happen, not because they wanted this to happen. Not really, because at the end of the day, this is hard. This is problematic for them. But the point that the images that were going around were of somebody else. I actually think this is meant to muddy the waters here. This is not something I think was meant to happen. I think this is a very problematic story for them that's already blowing up in their face. And so I think what we're seeing is a bunch of nonsense, like I've talked about in the past. False images, so that people question whether what they're getting is real. I've got an entire point I've seen of partisans out there from the right claiming this was a false flag, which we should ask that every single time. But where's the evidence of that? Claiming that ultimately this was faked and it was a lie. Okay, maybe. But what does that lead to if that's not true? It leads to the ignoring the murder of a U.S. citizen as the story. Like I've talked about in the past, missing the forest for the trees, where you get a large story. Lahaina, for example, where there's tons of actually really relevant, very interesting side stories that some which don't have a lot of evidence, but are, seem to be very important. And we should focus on those things to a degree. But what happened a lot of the times, like in that example, was people started focusing on the larger abstract things and stopped holding the government accountable for basic crimes they were committing. Never got held accountable, as far as I can tell. Tons of crimes were committed. But because it was about larger, points that we couldn't verify, and you got morons like Stu Peters out there talking about blue roofs, well, we missed the point, guys. And they got away with murder, literally. So that's the thing we should consider right now, is the effort is to deflect from the obvious right in front of you. Don't fall for that. Now, here is the video. This is the 4-minute one, the full video that's going around that I can find. And then we'll play let's play what Cristian Noam said first, because it's kind of incredible to me.
You asked about a shooting that we just had in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was an act of domestic terrorism. What happened, it was our ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle, and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle. An officer of ours acted quickly and defensively shot to protect himself and the people around him. And my understanding is that she was hit and is deceased. We're continuing to gather more information, but this goes to Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was an act of domestic terrorism. What happened, it was our ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle, and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle.
So remember that. Okay. Remember as you see the video. I mean, this is my point about this is there's nuance in some ways. You could argue that maybe he had a justification to do something. But the idea that what you're claiming is that ultimately this person, that they rushed them and had to react. I mean, I mean, this is my point about incompetence. She must have seen something, or maybe she doesn't know there's a video. I don't know. But this is wholesale lying.
Surrounding them and attempted to run them over to push out their vehicle, and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and ram them.
Well, yeah, the argument of running them over only happened after she was trying to turn away and she was open fire on. So this is like them saying, stop resisting, and that justifies the arrest. You can't argue that the action in response to your stop is the reason you were arrested. You can't even make that make sense because you did it before it started. You know, it's just, it's crazy to me. This is what they do. They know they've got blind support. That's why.
With her vehicle. An officer of ours acted quickly and defensively shot to protect himself and the people around him. And my understanding is...
Okay, but why would that protect anybody else? Even if you thought she was trying to hit you on the way out? Because that's where it was aiming in the other direction. Why would that protect anybody? Right? Why would the assumption be she's going to swing back around and come running at you with the car when you're all armed? That doesn't seem like a very logical assumption. This does not seem even, and we'll get into it more in a second, the idea of protecting yourself. Well, wait to watch the video and then we'll make it more clear.
Is that she was hit and is deceased. We're continuing to gather more information, but this goes to show the assaults that our ICE officers and our law enforcement are under every single day.
Yeah, it sure does. The lie about it, for sure.
These vehicle rammings are domestic acts of terrorism. We're working with the Department of Justice to prosecute them as such. We will continue to protect our ICE officers.
Right. You know, sort of like when they tried to argue that people sitting in the streets were terrorism. You know, because that was ridiculous, even though it might bother you, or anything on the other side, or not taking a shot, or talking about things. The left called you all terrorists, right? I mean, it's how do we keep allowing ourselves to fall into these ridiculous games? As I say that, I don't think it's actually happening in a majority anymore, and that's what's so confounding about it. But think about how wild that is. You know, how often you're a terrorist or a Nazi because you've got a red hat on. You're doing the same thing right now. For those of you that are actually somehow falling for the trap, you're doing the same thing to them the same way. You're talking about you're talking about people who are not justified in being murdered and murdering them in the streets because you claim doing this action that they didn't even really do amounts to terrorism, even though by definition, it absolutely does not. Nome is out of her depth as most of these people are. As I said, ICE, and we're going to go through these, ICE has been already caught in court lying about being run over to justify the shooting of American citizens. Let that sink in. This is not even close to the first time since the beginning of 2025 that ICE has lied about circumstances to get away with murder. Now, technically, I should have said attempted murder. This is what I put out earlier. The point was there's one shooting that amounted to murder, but there, as I said here, there's numerous times they've already been used the run over lie to justify their shooting, which easily could have amounted to murder to children, to women, to babies in the cars they were opening fire on. But let's first watch this. But bear in mind, they've already been caught lying about exactly things like this. And here's a video showing you they're lying now. Remember how she started that? They came up to them and they had to defend themselves, right? Well, watch very clearly as they walk up to her car. There's the first obvious deception. Okay, so their argument is that there's stuff that was happening before this. There probably was. These people are observers. They're watching them. Just like, for example, the Free Thought Project, who I'll shout out here in general, seeing as how for the longest time they've been doing, what do they call it? Cop watching to ensure that they don't break the law. And in doing so, almost always catch them breaking the law. Of course, because they don't want to be watched. That's why they're wearing masks and identifying themselves. But the point is, she's not breaking the law. They run up on her and say, get out of the effing car. Okay, who are you? Do you have a warrant? What's going on? Like these things matter, despite the screaming people out there claiming to be America first and talking about liberty who don't seem to want that to matter. If you're of the mind that this person was doing something wrong, then why don't we verify that? Why is the assumption that the power that you claim you're fighting is somehow always right? It's lazy thinking. It's actually a lack of logic, guys. So what they just did was run up on the car, yell, "Get out of the car," okay? And like we're going to go over in a moment, many people have been in the position and have driven away. Now, look, I'm of the mind very clearly that she knows who they are. Not like personally, but that these are officers. So like other situations I'll show you, the argument is that there's no justification, or rather there's no reason to assume that they know that these are not grifters. As I've shown you many times in this very conversation, guys. There's already been examples of people dressing up like ICE and robbing buildings, people dressing up like authorities and raping women. I've shown you these stories. Because nobody's identifying themselves. They're not being required to give warrants anymore. Why that is not the biggest story in the world, I don't know, to Republicans in particular. So my point is that in the past, people have driven away because I'm not going to risk this. People don't even realize that the law today, even though they'll probably arrest you for even doing this, is that if you're driving on the street, for example, and you don't feel comfortable where you are, the law states that you can continue to drive until you feel comfortable pulling over. Even if their lights are behind you for 20 minutes. I just didn't like the area. I wanted to pull somewhere safe. Of course, there's a line to that. But so I'm trying to get to the idea that if you are in a situation where you're under threat and you don't trust what's happening, maybe, whatever it is, you have a right to do that. Driving away is not a justification to kill people. And I will show you the examples where they did so knowing that they were not being driven at, but were angry that they weren't being listened to, and then lied about being run over. So watch this. They run up and say, "Get out of the car." Backs up. No! Okay. Do you see the guy right there in the front? He starts to draw his weapon, right? What could he have easily done right there? Moved out of the way. Okay. So you may go, "No, he's trying to arrest her." Okay. Well, what you're saying is then the obligation is to put yourself in the way of the danger so you can rationalize murdering the person? I mean, you have to understand that none of this is the way, like, does anybody even talk to cops anymore? This is not standard operating procedure. What they're doing is, and on top of the fact that your life being at risk is a common reality, and that's the job. And so using that very risk, even though it's not there to justify, this is like them shooting chihuahuas because they claim their life's at risk. I've seen that many times. A chihuahua, not a joke, by the way, shooting the dog because it runs up to them because they can get away with that. That may be a stretch for some people, but watch the guy. He's in front of the car. He has time to move out of the way as she's starting to move the car. Wouldn't you do that too? You have the license plates. Why don't you just shoot her in the car? Oh, shit! Okay. You can very clearly see, and I'll show a better picture, the guy shot as she was driving by, and he jumped out of the way. The argument that he was injured is completely false, on top of the fact that I'll show you him walking away and getting into his car. As Trump is claiming he's in the hospital. We don't even know he's alive. That's how ridiculous these people are. Now I'll play it all the way through.
No! Shit!
And see, here's the crazy part on top of it. He fired 2 more shots as she was going by. Why is that happening? Wouldn't it be a reactionary shot? I mean, it's just... Everything about this is wrong. And if you actually want to look and listen to honest cops or anybody else online, they'll tell you that. There's plenty of people who are in these positions going, "These people are ridiculous." But you don't get that from the mainstream alternative media or even left, or, well, technically I am seeing a lot of left media covering this, but overall, the majority of the conversation, as usual, is somehow rationalizing why this is the okay thing to do.
No! Shit!
Now.
What
she
the fuck?
crashes in down there.
What the fuck? You just fucking, what the fuck did you do?
Sorry, there's cussing. I mean, that's the gist of the,
Fuck!
Sorry, I was trying to get away from all the cussing.
What the?
So basically, then it just, they manage it from there. I mean, in the past, this is where they would be throwing down, guns with no serial numbers and dropping cocaine in your front seat, right? We've very, very much happened a lot in the past. Now, body cameras, but there's different ways this goes, especially with ICE that doesn't identify themselves. Why do you think they do that? Because now, as we're going to get into, nobody knows who did what, right? I mean, in some cases, as we're going to find, the shooter, but in a general sense, when they talk about who, and he's involved in past incidents, who? What's his name? How do we verify that? It's literally unaccountable, and that's the whole point, guys. So let's get into some of this. Well, first, let me go over some of these examples. Then we're going to get into how many times this has happened before and how clear it is that they're lying. Aaron Fisher says, freeze frames for the specific moments when the ICE agent draws and fires pistol 3 times, killing the woman driving the vehicle. And it's pretty clear. I mean, you can look for yourself. You can see, look at what, I mean, there's, to pretend that this guy was in danger or that ultimately he was hit is a lie or went to the hospital. Here's Megyn Kelly doing the dishonest thing that she does. Now, you could also point out that, like a lot of these people, Tim Pool included, who I believe is right here, get sent something by people they think they can trust, and they're always being played by those people, sort of like Alex does with the big sources he gets. I mean, reality is, this is a ridiculous clip. And look, this is from 2:51 yesterday. You can look at where the time is on all of these. So there's access to better content out there, but here's what she decides to show. Oh, weird. All you get is the video, the sound of the shot, and then the car driving past and hitting another car. And of course, what she wants to show, so she's dead already, sadly enough, crashing into that car. So what she wants you to focus on is look at how she turns towards the guy. No, not really, actually, if you care to look at the actual video, Megyn Kelly, big time journalist over here, because that's not true. That's what she says. Watch this. She accelerates into him. You just watched the video the same as I did. These people are jokes, guys. They are lying to you or just always have been this bad at their job. Remember, Megyn Kelly's the one that not too long ago said that Palestinians would rather let their children starve to death than save a Jewish person. Aside from the fact that how many Palestinians are literally working with Jews, she's disgusting or just very dishonest or both. Tim Pool, it's terrifying that we have come to the point where middle-aged white women are willing to kill federal agents for their ideology. I mean, you couldn't write a more manipulative, inaccurate characterization of what that was. But this is what Tim Pool does. Now, of course, you could argue he's trolling. The same difference, though. The same thing they all do. This is about deceiving people. Almost 1 million views. So, willing to kill federal agents. You walk me through how that's what happened, Tim, or for their ideology. So now this has become an ideologically driven murder. These people are a joke. There's just no way to describe that. They're cartoons. This is absurd. And it's clearly about an agenda. They killed Charlie. That's where they are. And it's embarrassing because it's just simply, it is at best, a wildly broad exaggeration or assumption. And of course, Trump comes out and says, he acted in self-defense. I've just seen the video. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, it's a horrible thing to watch. The woman screaming was obviously a professional agitator. Are you kidding me? You see how they do? Is that just your wild assumption? She's screaming because you murdered somebody, Donald Trump, on top of the fact that she's been there monitoring them and watching them break all these laws. A professional agitator? That's what he says with the signs. And you know what a professional, it doesn't matter. It frustrates me how dishonest they can be. But the question is, who's actually buying it? I hope it's not a lot. And when the woman driving the car was very disorderly, obstructing and resisting, and then violently, willfully, viciously ran over the officer. That's what he just said. Clearly somebody told him this, or he's just lying on his own, who seems to have shot her in self-defense. Willfully, viciously ran over an ICE officer. Who's, based on the attached clip, it is hard to believe he's alive. That's what he just said. You saw the clip, guys. There's not a different version of that, but is now recovering in the hospital. No, did not. It seems they've even added on the whole, he briefly went there, but then was released. That seems to be a lie. This is how they operate. The situation is being studied in its entirety, but the reason these incidents are happening is because the radical left is threatening, assaulting, and targeting our law enforcement officers. There's no evidence of that, guys, other than people who are individually taking action, like in Dallas, that were arrested and he killed himself. And ultimately, then they tried to make it about the left that actually petered out because there's no evidence. What we can see are people monitoring what they're doing while they're doing things illegal. And some of them taking liberties, some of them acting violently happens on the left and the right, and they should be charged for those crimes. To argue this is the Tom Homan 1,000% increase, which was a lie that we proved to you at the time, and even Grok will tell you is manufactured out of whole cloth. They are just trying to do the job of making America safe. No, they're not. We need to stand by and protect our law enforcement officers from this radical left movement of violence and hate. But meanwhile, we're funding a genocide that kills only Palestinians. Meanwhile, we're literally overthrowing countries for our own personal agenda. Meanwhile, we're selling out every possible American left and right to a foreign agenda. But yeah, get the bad guys on the left. Oh, here, this is just Shannon Joy responding, saying false in what Trump said. This is the most comprehensive and best video I've seen. It's the same video on the assassination. These masked ICE criminals executed an American citizen in broad daylight who posed absolutely no threat to him. She clearly turned the wheel and evaded the agent to flee. God bless the young woman who captured this video. I don't care about her politics. She's incredibly courageous and has done critical service to the nation. Yeah, some people have principles. Aaron Melnick says there is no evidence that the officer who shot the woman was injured at all, despite Trump's claim here that he's recovering in the hospital. Immediately after the shooting, you can see him walking completely normally, and he stayed on the scene for a while before driving off, which I'll show you. I mean, here's his still shots. I'll show you the video. Now right there, you have his face. So we damn well better figure out who this person is, in my opinion. Oh, it's right here. Steve Grove. I knew that would happen. But so my point is they're doing their best to keep this from being discussed. Now, that's important. I wish I had had that before, because what's coming is a point about them claiming he was dragged behind a vehicle before. J.D. Vance says, I want every ICE officer to know that their president, vice president, and the entire administration stands behind them. That's what you do. That's what you do when you murder somebody. To the radicals assaulting them, doxing them, threatening them. Congratulations, we're going to work even harder to enforce the law. You can call it whatever you want. That is them doubling down because there's nothing else you can do. He also says, this is preposterous. Oh, this guy, he's a lawyer, I believe. He says right here, I'm a former defense attorney and currently civil liberties attorney with no political dog in this fight. I watched the video at least 10 times from different angles and at different speeds and waited to offer an opinion, which I still reserve the right to change if additional information changes. Every time. That should be the unspoken reality. It is very clear that the officers instigated the confrontation. The woman initially tried to wave them past her, which you can see. ICE officers have no authority to search a U.S. citizen or arrest her unless there's probable cause to believe she's harboring undocumented individuals, not a contention here. Doesn't that matter to people screaming about the Constitution? The idea that you have any justification to even initiate the stop because you don't like that she's watching you, because they're committing crimes, guys. That's easy to prove. Like we just watched out, right? So his point is important. They have no authority to do what they started doing. So when they then use her actions in response to their legal action, that's not going to work. Even if she did what they claim, and she did not. A woman surrounded by masked armed men who have no law enforcement authority over her has every right to escape. Think about that. Video shows her steering wheel is turned to the right, clearly an attempt to leave without hitting anyone and steer clear of the officer standing toward the front of the car. It's self-evident. That officer had time to step aside, which is what I pointed out, which is where he was when he shot her. Even a real police officer, which they are not, that's important, would not have the right to shoot at her for trying to flee, which is what they keep doing. This is well established in the case law. Deadly force may not be used simply to prevent someone from getting away. That's why they go with, I feared for my life. Given that the ICE officers had no law enforcement authority to begin with, and the video footage shows she was trying to escape a perceived threat, not to kill anyone, the crime is all the more inexcusable. I'm praying for the victim's family, especially her children. I'm also praying for all the conservatives who are so unprincipled and lost, they're excusing this terrible crime and gloating over a death that will leave 3 children motherless because of the victim's politics. I mean, is that the case? Is she even a Democrat? Right? I mean, again, I know the assumption is because it's lazy, guys. Is she a Democrat or not? Frankly, it doesn't matter. He's right. The point is about the murder. But the reality is, like with any of these things, being an observer of a criminal activity because they're constantly lying about these things. I know Republicans who are doing that. On top of the fact, like with Tyler Robinson, They make the same contention. Oh, he wore a mask. He must be a Democrat. Plenty of Republicans wore masks. Oh, on and on and on. It's the same thing. And we still don't really have that verified. They just go with what they want you to believe. Same thing here. It is very despicable what they're doing. And like I said, I don't really think this is the majority of conservatives. I really don't. I think it's the same old manipulative liars out there doing the same thing. And here, speaking of a manipulative liar, here's JD Vance. This is preposterous. First of all, she was not waving the officers through, has no right to do so, even if she were. What do you mean? You can't go get out of my way? That's not a valid argument. She is waving another car through before the officers approached her. Oh, and you know this because you're psychic? You see how wild this is? This is how he starts his argument. Second, the officers are not randomly searching her. They're approaching her vehicle because she's violating the law. Okay, namely, she's obstructing a law enforcement operation. Don't you love that excuse? They use that against anybody that's just bothering them. It's not what's happening. You're not illegally, she's a U.S. citizen driving her car. The idea that they make the case like this is dishonest, but that's what they do. To anybody who's like, this is how like creating violence in a protest to shut the whole protest down. That's the same thing they do here, right? That you are obstructing operations. Or usually they say that after you're resisting. They use their own actions to justify the next step. You're not allowed to walk up to or drive up to people who are enforcing the law. Is he ridiculous? I mean, I shouldn't even. Yes, he is. Guys, watch this. Right now, watch as they walk up to her car. I mean, they're just going with the narrative that he or the rest of them are stating. Now, the question always becomes, is he aware of that? Right? Or is they buying the narrative just like anybody else because they're either just that stupid or that they're not even the ones setting the narrative? I honestly don't know, because I would like to believe they could make a better life than this. But here he is saying that's what happened was you're not allowed to walk up to them or drive up to them. Well, that didn't happen, bud. So you're wrong. Third, this defense attorney is drawing a meaningless distinction between ICE officer and police officer. He's really not, especially when we get into the reality of how flimsily these people were trained in the first place, right? The idea that they cut it down to simply 47 days to make sure he got more people out there. Or that they're right now going, we need more people, no training. That's the idea. On top, but even if they had normal training, they're not the same thing. It's just not. He said, and they don't have the same authority in regard to police enforcement. They do not. Again, he writes, you're not allowed to interrupt law enforcement. Didn't happen, which is exactly what this woman was doing. No, she wasn't. Fourth, the officer didn't discharge his weapon to prevent her from fleeing. When he discharged his weapon, she had pointed the vehicle at him. Did you not read? You can look at the video. Again, guys, you can not only see that the wheels were turned, you can see that she was turning in the first place and there's other videos in general. The fact on top of it is that you can watch that he was not even in the way. It's not updating. Anyway, we just watched it 4 times in a row. You can see that he's not in the way. And the fact that he fires after she's by, these are very important points that anybody honest is going to engage with. I mean, what do you expect JD Vance to do? Oh, yeah, you got us. He's a murderer. We did this and we're responsible. We've been covering up for it the entire time. Of course not. And of course, Trump's orders are to never admit fault, ever. Have you once seen them do that? And it's not unique. When's the last time you saw a government person ever say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake? Think about that for a second. And press the gas. I mean, come on. You can literally see her brake and then go, God, this guy's a clown. He discharged his weapon in self-defense, and other angles of the video show the woman clearly hit the officer. Really? That's the best video you could possibly see, where you can see the gap between him and the car. What you're doing is talking about Megyn Kelly's view that shows him look like he got hit because he backed away. That's dishonest. This gaslighting is off the charts. I agree with that part, and I'm having none of it. This guy was doing his job. She tried to stop him from doing his job. Again, no, he didn't. No, she didn't. When he approached her car, she tried to hit him. Simply did not. A tragedy, absolutely, but a tragedy that falls on this woman, it's all her fault. All of the radicals who teach the people that immigration, it's despicable, isn't it? Even if you argue you disagree with what she was trying to do, that this is somehow justifiable because they made her. I mean, it's bad, guys. This is bad. What these people are doing is despicable at a level that I've never seen before, because of the consistency of how they're doing this. Now, Matt Walsh doing the same thing, says she was trying to stage an illegal blockade of the road to interfere with the ICE agents. Okay, let's even say it's true. Why would that be what they make it out? Like the idea that you're in the street trying to stop people from getting away with what you would argue is illegal action because they're not identifying themselves, they're not producing warrants, and that would be real, by the way. But okay, let's just even say it's not true. The idea that you would then go to the point of trying to shoot her to stop her from getting out of the way as she's turning to drive away is the entire point. And then rammed her car into one of them. They're all doing the same thing, guys. It's despicable. And as David Icke rightly points out, this is the face of the extreme MAGA media today. And I want to be clear, I do not think that represents the majority of MAGA or conservatives or Republicans. He says everything that the mainstream media has long been, and that's important. He and I share this point that these people are the mainstream media today, or at least the extension of it. A mother blatantly murdered by Trump's ICE, a U.S. citizen, is explained and lied away with a lack of empathy and decency that beggars belief. Extreme MAGA is psychopathic, just like extreme progressives. See? Some people can see it. We need to take our world back from psychopaths and authority and psychopaths that do their bidding. Well said. Here is Pedro pointing out a Republican that was on the scene that challenges what J.D. Vance just screamed about. First, he says, every congressional Democrat and every Democrat who's running for president should be asked a simple question. Do you think this officer was right in defending his life again? So they're trying to make this a pivotal wedge dynamic because they need people to justify murder by the government because narrative that gives them power over everything. So you're now making it a pivotal, but guess what? Check out what's going on online. You're going to find a lot of Republicans who are like, man, that's just crazy. I agree with most of what you're doing, but that's a step too far. There's a line for everybody, as I keep pointing out. So now he's trying to make it something that you have to side with. That's the cat turd dynamic. You're on our side, you're on their side. What do you like more? What do you care about more? Do you want to be part of the Republican team or do you want to be correct and moral? Well, too many people are going to go, damn it, I want to be part of the team. Even people that might be good in other ways. I'm serious. This is what they're doing. They're trying to convince low intelligent people to side with what they want versus what they know is right. He's a monster, like the rest of them are, left and right. Do you think he was justified? Well, he's not, period. It's obvious, but he'll continue to force it. These people are going to try to arrest our law enforcement for doing their jobs. Okay, are they identifying themselves? No. Are they presenting warrants? No. Have they been caught lying over and over? Yes. Have they? What are we talking about? The least the media could do is ask them about it. About what? The least they could do is create your divisive binary tactic that's meant to make people choose between what's right and what they want. Sad. And Pedro says Vance is such a cynical goon that he saw a widowed mom get shot in the head, and his first thought was, how can we spin this to improve our electoral odds? But here's a self-described right-leaning witness who said that's not how we're supposed to do things in America. You'd be surprised, maybe not, probably not if you watch this show, by how many people are of that mindset.
8:30 this morning, I was just getting up and I heard a bunch of commotion and whistling outside, and then I heard bang, 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 3 shots. I went to go look out the window and it looked like there's a Honda over there that crashed, and I found out it was an observer that got shot and killed, and I saw them carry it. I got a bunch of video of them carrying the body to the ambulance and stuff. So there's an observer that got shot at an ICE raid of the house next door.
I'm sure that was a scary thing to witness.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty right-leaning, but seeing this is not what you need to do. This is not how to do it. It's not how we're supposed to do things around here in America. So.
What was how many agents and other people were here when that happened?
When it first started, there was maybe 20, but now there's hundreds, and then they got everybody out. So.
Right. That's called the Kash Patel effect. They all rush over. They want to be a part of the scene and put their jackets on, women's size, of course. And they go, I'm in charge and I'm here and I'm present and I put my name on the list. I'm kind of joking, but the idea is, why would there be hundreds of agents? Think about it for a second. That's not like some developing story, or situation. It's over. It's one example. And it's a big deal, though. Hundreds of agents? I think it speaks for itself. I think it's the culture they're creating. And it's pretty damn embarrassing for most Americans if you're paying attention.
It's kind of crazy right now.
What's it been like seeing all of this?
Kind of scary. I lived during the riots in 2020, so it's kind of paralleling that right now. It's kind of same feeling. Hoping it doesn't, but it's getting a little rowdy.
And of course, right, you could argue he's lying about being right-leaning, which I've already seen people making the point, he called an observer. It's not everybody is as blindly adherent to the extreme side of right and left. Most people exist in the middle, which is what I'm trying to show everybody. And so maybe he made it up to make a point, maybe not. I mean, the point is there's plenty of people out there that very much exist within the reality of morality and have some kind of boundaries, I guess. But that's important, I think. And you'll find it's more common than you realize if you take the time to look. 7Cs makes an excellent point. Here's Nicholas Fuentes, of course, like all the rest seeming. Everyone who obstructs ICE should be arrested immediately. Enough is enough. See, they always show themselves, guys. I mean, look, maybe he just believes that, like there's plenty of points to make about just, like I always say, just because somebody says something that I find to be almost hard to believe doesn't mean they're immediately, you shouldn't be like, they're a shill then, or they're fighting for the agenda. But I think it's important, right? Like I say with Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's out there calling big things out. But then even right now, radical left terrorism, which again, there exists extremism on all sides to make the about one. It's the agenda, guys. So this, enough is enough. I mean, he's not stupid, guys. He understands the reality of the Constitution, the idea that they're not presenting warrants. You can prove all this stuff, that they've killed people. They've arrested American citizens. He's probably even criticized it, but now you're going absolute all the way down. If they do it, they should be shot or they should be arrested on sight. No. If they're breaking the law, then they have no justification to arrest anybody. And it says the feds have the authority to deport illegal immigrants. Yeah, sure they do. That's irrelevant to what we're talking about. It doesn't matter whether it's what they're doing or they're enforcing anything else. It's about the law and our constitutional rights. It's what he pretends to care about in some cases. Trump has a political mandate for mass deportations. I hate that argument. It doesn't mean anything at the way our broken system works, especially when you realize the voting system is not what we tell ourselves it is, as even they'll argue when it suits their interests. A political mandate means that a small majority of a minority of people who are involved in our legitimate elections decided that he should be elected for many reasons, one of them being that for some of them. But yeah, they all agree. Lazy thinking and simply manipulation. But this is an insurrection, he says. It should be put down with the force of the federal government. That's Nick Fuentes. I mean, it speaks for itself. As Derek says, shut up, bootlicker. I mean, you're calling an insurrection because this woman was killed. And the fact that the full force of the government, guys, this is the problem. That is what he's doing right there. That is the large agenda, and he's a part of it. Whatever else is happening. Doubt these people, please. Okay? Associated Press, an ICE agent fatally shot a woman accused of trying to run over officers. Oh, that's what this was. This person simply points out, when you think about this in the context of Israel and the overlap, an ICE agent fatally shot a woman accused of trying to run over officers in her crackdown on immigration. As he points out, it's the exact same way they write about killing people in the West Bank. Really think about that for a second and how we see them talk about this. Some kid was throwing a stone. They make up this random story. It's about the rationalization of the execution of somebody, which happens all the time in the West Bank. Now it seems to start in this country. Same point here. Jasper says, indistinguishable from IDF language. Here's Homeland Security. Today, ICE officers in Minneapolis were conducting targeted operations when rioters began blocking ICE officers. One of those rioters weaponized her vehicle, attempting to run over the law enforcement. You saw the video. This is IDF textbook stuff, guys. It's what they do every day. Oh, wait. Oh, I missed one. Hold on. I've suddenly remembered just now that there was the 7Cs point. I'll make sure I went back to that because that started this point. Hold on. Oh, yes, it was right here. Glad I remembered that. So we went over Nicholas Fuentes saying what he just said. Insurrection. Government has to crack down on everybody. Well, as 7Cs rightly points out, ICE is infiltrated, trained, and equipped by the IDF. Well, so too is most of our police forces. This is easily verifiable from the top at the very least, but even individual people on the lowest of the rungs are being trained in some cases. They've openly discussed this, on top of the fact that their tools they're using are all largely Israel influenced or created. And that's, again, it's dismissed by people who want to make it that we're upset. Look into this stuff. It's on the surface. It's not some tangential point. Palantir, for example, they're completely immersed. They joined strategically with Israel in regard to their operations. They're spying on you. The U.S. government has a strategic partnership with AI, which gives them access to all of what they're using to train their AI, which is everything they have on you. These are verifiable points. On top of the fact, I mean, I can go on forever. The idea is that there is an overlap that goes well beyond just an overlap. Their national counterterrorism seminars take place in Israel, ICE. Many of these trips are organized and funded by non-governmental organizations, such as the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, and the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. They use Israeli spyware. They do. They use Israeli methods. They do. They support the Israeli caucuses. Now, I knew I was going to bring this up. This is really just a guy talking about it, but it still makes the point, and it's valid. And it goes way beyond just what he mentions.
The most chilling thing I've seen responding to these immigration raids. I'm an immigrant rights attorney, and usually I'm a pretty optimistic guy. I don't get scared easily. I love watching horror movies. Over the past 6 months, I've seen some really disturbing stuff. At one location, people hid when I showed up, and I still found them using a thermal drone that detects body heat. Where was this technology first tested? By Israel in occupied Palestine. When people get taken by ICE, they often refuse to say their names. So ICE identifies them using a facial recognition technology. Where was this tech first used? By Israel in occupied Palestine. When people refuse to let ICE search their phones, ICE will plug their phones into this box and it unlocks their phone. Where was this tech first used? By Israel in occupied Palestine. The amount of dystopian tech that the US government has taken from Israel to use in its own country is terrifying. And this is why
So I agree. I think it's very important to understand that overlap. And it doesn't have to make it all about Israel, just that's an important point. Like, I think it's obviously relevant while this government is publicly not only committing genocide, but praising it, normalizing it, acting like this is justified. It matters from their mindset. Absolutely. And then Zionism Observer, who we mentioned at the beginning of the show, I think just relevant to overlap. While they're being trained by these people, well, here's Israeli soldiers on the 6th who carried out a school shooting. That's not some kind of euphemism, guys. 3 students were shot. Israeli occupation soldiers chased students with gunfire, tear gas during their incursion into the Birzeit University campus in Ramallah. I mean, I'm just blown away by the brazenness of what they're doing lately. It's beyond what we've seen before. 3 students injured by Israeli forces. Israeli occupation forces raided Birzeit University, firing tear gas, live ammunition, which led to several students suffering from suffocation. 8,000 students trapped inside the university. People were shot. That's a school shooting, guys, for whatever the justification or rationalization. And think about what that does to the people, to their lives. This is what they're being trained by. And as Henry and many others pointed out, as the juxtaposition of the two of them, I'll play it for you. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. Now, I actually don't think I have it downloaded, but here she is telling you terrorist act, and she tried to ram them, or she rushed up to them, and you could watch for yourself that they're lying to you. But as you can see, and also that's really important to make the note of, even though we've already kind of said it. We all should be taking note right now of anybody who is out there trying to tell you otherwise. You can look for yourself. Megyn Kelly and Matt Walsh and all of the rest of the usual suspects are out there trying to convince you that that's not true. Trying to convince you that it's some kind of a coordinated domestic terrorism radical, exactly like you were being called a terrorist back when it was not what was happening. Think about it. So, Ashraf Rafsani also points out an unverified video from Minneapolis of a doctor, or at least claiming to be a doctor, at the scene, claiming to want to help her before, or at least possibly before she was dead. And they didn't care.
Can I go check a pulse?
No! Back up! Now!
I'm a physician!
I don't care. We understand. We got EMS coming, and I get it. Just give us a second. We have medics on scene. We have our own medics.
Where are they? Where are they? How can I relax? You just killed my fucking neighbor! You caught butter in the fucking face! You killed my fucking neighbor! How do you show up to work every day? How the fuck do you do this every day? You're killing my neighbors, you're stealing my neighbors, what the fuck, man?
Yeah, clearly paid agitators, right, Trump? Right? Who cares that you can prove that they live right there and that they're doing this because you're abducting people from their neighborhood without justification? By the way, I'm not even talking about illegal immigrants, guys. Even that, though, without knowing what's going on, which we can prove to you 10 times over, they're just scooping people up without proving that. That's why they keep accidentally getting U.S. veterans and accidentally getting U.S. citizens, many of which they then abuse, like Ritas, the U.S. veteran who they held for days and didn't let shower. He was a veteran and a U.S. citizen. They didn't like the way he made them feel stupid for arresting him. He's done a whole interview about this. I mean, it just pains me. So the main point, though, relax. We got someone coming. She died there. She died right where they were standing. And here they are pushing away people that want to help her. Doesn't that also feel very much like what Israel does every day? You don't have to make that point because it's despicable regardless. But I still think it's relevant to who trains the mindset, guys. But either way, it makes me sick that anybody's out here, like we just pointed to, acting like that's somehow justifiable, any part of it, and then lying, gaslighting about what they are, what they're doing. Like I said, there's far too many people out there who are standing up and screaming down everyone's throats about the opposite, the lie. We need to be real about who they are and call that out. Brianna Joy Gray, to get into some examples, points out something we've all talked about in the past. Remember this? The Las Vegas overlap? Daniel Shaver, a random American citizen who just happened to come out of his room and they told him to get down on the floor. He's sobbing as he gets on the floor. And the guy was literally trying to pull his shirt back down. And after he was crying and saying, I'm in, and they shot him dead in that hallway. I'm sure you all remember it. Not worth playing again. It's terrifyingly sad. The point is, guys, as she writes, moreover, she was following orders, the one we just saw. Eyewitnesses have also added on that she was being given mixed directions, which, by the way, is one of the most common things we hear about the way these all go down, because they've got different authorities, different, police and ICE, and then half the time these ICE bounty hunters, they don't even know what they're supposed to be doing, and they're just completely they're contradicting each other. I mean, that's real. You could look it up. It's wildly common right now. And that's one of the issues from before. She was told to leave, told to go, told to back up. And then when she did, they ended up opening fire in one of these cases because she did what the other one said. Eyewitnesses said she was being given mixed directions, which is a classic trick that police use to provide cover for murdering people. That's another way to frame it. Or it could just be incompetence and they just use it anyway. But I want you to remember this, what these people are capable of and how it's completely unjustified and how nobody was really held accountable for it. Tim says, I'm not easily shook these days, but the number of people who think the appropriate punishment for not following a masked federal agent's order is assassination is rather shocking. Branko Marcitic points out, according to another eyewitness on the scene, ICE, which we should question, there's a lot of political motivation flying around, but we should question, but also shouldn't dismiss without investigation. Saying that ICE gave the woman they killed contradictory instructions, then aggressively surrounded her vehicle. One told her to leave, then the other complied. Another tried to open the car door and told her to get out while the killer got in front of her. Now, we kind of can see that when you can break down the guy coming to the door handle. But this says this both matches up with the other eyewitness accounts and what we can all see with our own eyes in the video of the murder. I agree. Here is when they celebrate. Now, I really want to, we don't have to dwell too long on this, guys, but think about this. Even if everything that they told you was true, and we know it's not, why in the world would you celebrate and high five after murdering a U.S. citizen? And the only thing I can think of, and this is why I'm showing you Joe Lonsdale discussing killing commies and executing leftists, is whether or not there is an ideological drive here or just the political motivation to think that these people are all evil, disgusting, anti-left, left radical monsters because that's what they're being fed. Or they're just disgusting people who high five about military adventurism in America. But she says they murdered her and then celebrated on camera while her blood was still drying on the airbag. Now, if I played the audio, you just hear everyone screaming over the top, but look at them. That's them, basically congratulating each other. And you can sort of hear overall the screaming. I just don't understand how anybody can make, unless you are just a borderline psychopath, how we cannot be outraged about this. And this is Eric Dougherty was the one I was trying to remember before, doing the same thing he always does. Red flashing light. What they just did was great. Whatever it is, fill in the blank. And here he is going, holy crap. J.D. Vance is livid. Well, a usual response to being shown to be a liar is to act outraged. Typical. And as usual, Elon Musk goes, true. That's his algorithmic game where you just go, that thing is up, and you raise up whatever you want. So as we continue to see, as I think I have a post in here like this from him, is that he's out there literally algorithmically upping every single post he can find that makes the false argument about what happened here. It's what he did with Venezuela in the past. It's what he did with South Africa. It's what he does with Haiti and every other conversation that we've proven they've been lying about. You think this is not by accident? Oh, wait, I think it's right here.
When I was actually walking out here, somebody sent me a photo of a CNN headline about what happened in Minneapolis.
Or you could point out a number of other articles that aren't perceived as being as partisan, but there's a reason it's about CNN, to trick people who are not smart enough to think it's a Democrat lie without caring to look, like the Epstein files.
This is the headline. I'm just going to read it. Outrage after ICE officer kills U.S. citizen in Minneapolis. Well,
Yep, exactly what happened, right?
Well, that's one way to put it.
Yeah.
And that is the way that many people in the corporate media have put this attack over the last 24 hours. And
Otherwise known as exactly what happened. What am I missing? Like, that's not even spun. Outrage after ICE kills U.S. That's crazy to me. Like, so if let's just say there was a crime being committed, would that not change? You know, I overthink it, but there's points like this that aren't necessarily worthy of spending so much time on, but it's just so obvious. He's just trying to manipulate people who aren't smart enough to stand by their own opinion.
I say attack very, very intentionally, because this was an attack on federal law enforcement. This was an attack on law and order. This was an attack on the American people.
Of course. Right. What didn't happen is an attack on all of you. Be outraged and join with whatever I say next.
The way that the media, by and large, has reported this story has been an absolute disgrace, and it puts our law enforcement officers at risk.
See, people who aren't, maybe don't even know enough about it, are swayed by forceful talking, just by this speech will end up walking away going, yeah, dumb Democrats. Well, I know what's going on. I trust these guys. He's lying to you. And it's very easy to prove.
Every single day. What that headline leaves out is the fact that that very ICE officer nearly had his life ended, dragged by a car.
Dragged. Apparently he was dragged by a car. I guess we missed that in the video.
6 months ago, 33 stitches in his leg. So you think maybe he's a little bit sick.
We're going to get into that next, actually. Now, by the way, the reason I jumped at that is because there has been, even Trump in other contexts have stated that he was dragged by the car, not probably misunderstanding that that's something they claim happened before. But they've done this. They do it all the time. It's like Trump's MS-13 thing. They just kind of blend and mash it all together. But my point is, we don't get the information about who was involved in previous ones, even though we got his name now from his face, as internet's saying anyway. Previously, they've kept these things, their names out. This is why they do that. So there's no accountability. I'm going to go over all the examples I have of alleged being dragged by the car and ICE, and they've all been proven to be lies. I'll go over them. So who knows what he's stating right there could very well be something we don't know about. Guess that's possible.
Sensitive about somebody ramming him with an automobile.
Ramming him.
What that headline leaves out is that woman was there to interfere with a legitimate law enforcement operation.
Otherwise known as observing them as they break the law. Look, whether you like it or not, or agree with what's currently happening, that's why I mentioned the Free Thought Project. People like Matt Agaris, like Jason Bassler, and the rest of the team there. They've been doing cop watching for a long time because it's important, because they need to know that we're paying attention, because more often than not, they get caught breaking the law in some way or showing that they don't even understand the law. That's important. That's what they're doing here too. It's the same thing. Now, you can disagree with that, even though in every sense, the Republicans will be the ones siding with what Matt and them are doing. Now, because it's being framed as a Democrat thing, people just blindly resist. It's the same thing. Now, in doing that, which is not a crime, yes, you can do things that then break the law. Is that what she did? Doesn't appear to me. But again, as the other guy said, and I say every time, there may be more information that comes out that then changes the situation. Maybe she's caught on video earlier doing something, but it still would not change the illegality, or rather just the unjust nature of what happened. But as it stands right now, and even if there was something before, you can see her turning, you can see he wasn't hit, they're lying about it, all this matters. But I'm of the mind that there wasn't even some illegal act taking place, other than they don't like that they're being monitored. Or they claim by being there, you're somehow obstructing your operation, and they use that to push you out of the way. I've watched them on video and shown you people being pushed to the point of like knocking their head on the ground and having a concussion because they were simply watching them. Old women, young kids. I've shown you these on the show.
In the United States of America. Fear with a legitimate law enforcement operation in the United States of America. What that headline leaves out is that woman is part of a broader left-wing network.
Oh, okay. See, here's how we try to make it abstractly into some terrorism overlap. What network are we talking about? Is it just because she is identifying as a lefty? That becomes the lefty network? Yeah, that's how they frame this. It could be. Or is it because she's observing them? Is she part of an organization that likes to watch their, maybe. Is that a network? Is that no different than saying you're part of the Republican team who's trying to push back on him? Are you part of that network too? You could use those terms, but he's trying to make it sound like some kind of organized, manipulative, professional agitator. That's what he's doing.
To attack, to dox, to assault. And
exactly. Victim blaming. Thank you, Miss Pennywiser from the chat. That's exactly what he's doing.
Network to attack, to dox, to assault, and to make it impossible for our ICE officers to do their job.
I mean, again, doxing, I'd love for you to point these things out. Pointing out who they are or what their names are, which is legally required, is not doxing. They keep pushing that lie. If there's addresses being put out, then yes, that's called out. I haven't seen that personally. Or the idea that they're trying to stop what they're doing, they're breaking the law. I'm going to continue to stress that. That matters to me. It should matter to everybody. You can't just keep pretending like getting in their way or documenting what they're doing is a problem, on top of the fact that if you can prove they're breaking the law, it's our obligation as American citizens to be there, to call it out. It's in fact his obligation. He just doesn't care.
If the media wants to tell the truth, they ought to tell the truth that a group of left-wing radicals have been working tirelessly, sometimes using domestic terror techniques to try to make it impossible for the President of the United States to do what the American people elected him to do.
Yeah, one of the things, right? See, that's my point. Apparently, the only thing he ran on was just deporting people illegally. And they were like, yay. No, guys, there's a huge discussion about immigration, but that's one factor for a ton of people. And many of the, but that's just what they do. But terrorism tactics.
Wing radicals have been working tirelessly, sometimes using domestic terror techniques.
What's that? Sometimes using domestic terror techniques? I mean, what are we talking about? I'd love for you to flesh that out, because what you're basically saying is they're terrorists because we're insinuating the techniques they use overlap with what we claim other people do. But apparently that's 3 hops away. So according to them, you go to jail. That's the way that they run this today.
To try to make it impossible for the President of the United States to do what the American people elected him to do, which is enforce our immigration laws. The President stands with ICE.
You don't need to murder American citizens in the street to enforce immigration laws. In fact, what we'll get to in the ending here is the reality of what they're actually doing, which is pretty much focusing on you, Americans. You may not want to believe that, but it's pretty clear where this is going, especially with the numbers they're putting up, especially with all the other agendas, and especially with who seems to be driving this and what they're aiming at. But overall, I think it's very important to see the larger kind of overlap in the immigration dynamic and what it amounts to. And on top of the fact that the majority of people, and I mean the majority, you can quite easily prove are clearly not the worst of the worst. The rapists and all the stuff that's just not what's happening. You can prove in almost every sense they're working along the people like that, like the MS-13 overlaps in El Salvador that you can prove they're literally working with Bukele. But we don't talk about that. Or the fact that they dropped the charges and sent them back to Bukele, who he works with, where they're not being held accountable. But that's okay, though.
I stand with ICE. We stand with all of our law enforcement officers. And part of that is recognizing that you people in the media, not everybody in this room, but many people in this room have been lying about this attack. She was trying to ram this guy with her car. He shot back. He defended himself. He's already been seriously wounded in law enforcement operations before, and everybody who's been repeating the lie that this is some innocent woman who was out for a drive in Minneapolis.
I mean, nobody's saying that. Everybody I've talked to, everyone I've reported on is talking about observing them doing what they're doing. He can't even lie about that, because you understand, I think they're very aware that there's a difference there. They want you to think the lie is just some, out gallivanting in the street. It's not what's happening. They can't even be honest about that.
When a law enforcement officer shot at her, you should be ashamed of yourselves. Every single one of you. Questions?
Yeah, good. Just gaslight. Well, nobody believes you, man. So it doesn't really matter. Including a lot of Republicans. I hope that's clear. So let's get into some examples. Now, I find this to be one of the most important parts, but like I said, it's at the end today because ultimately this is, very easy to prove. It's literally looking at it versus what they're saying. And I don't know why we'd have to overfocus if we have to overfocus on things like that, then that means there's no chance of us winning in this. And I don't believe that. That's why I'm pointing out the people in conservative movements, or alternatively during COVID, and even right now on the left as well, that people aren't buying it, because I think that does show you the bigger picture of how clearly people are waking up. And how does that not make them desperate? They need that control to be able to execute this, to control your life, and it's not working. So here is a guy saying the agent shouldn't have shot her, and it says officers are trained to treat a vehicle being driven at them as a deadly force. They have seconds to respond. They don't know the driver's intent. And this is all very true. They're in real time, not hindsight. That's why they respond with force. Otherwise, this happens. And it's just a video of a guy getting hit with a car. Yeah, certainly possible. Clearly, that's not even close to what we just saw, but let's engage with the point, though, before we get to Musk. All right, so the idea, I mean, it's worth pointing this out because it's a fair point, is that at the end of the day, a police officer is put in a position to make real-time decisions of life and death in some of those circumstances, not every time life and death, where, they're afforded that the ability to make that choice in real time. So the argument often goes that how do we have a right to criticize when they're in that, when they're put in their life? Well, because because not everyone is just morally sound. Okay. Not every person that holds that position is just by default a good person. That's how they love to frame it. That's how Vance and them would love to pretend like we're all the virtuous people fighting for freedom and they're all the evil Democrat. The point is that whatever side you're looking at, in any group of human beings, there's going to be despicable people. There's going to be people who want to cheat and lie and steal and rape and murder. Guys, there's different percentages, obviously, and it's not everywhere, but it's the truth, and you know it. Whether left, whether right, whether Christian, whether Jewish, it doesn't matter, guys. It's always a part of the world. And so the dishonesty is to try to make it about one side, or rather your adversary, even when it's not always the case. So in this case, you have people that could take advantage of that. We've saw this in the past. Shooting people they want to, dropping drugs on people they want to hold accountable, or rather unjustly put in jail. It's been happening our entire lives. So in this case, when he asks, or talks about the choice, well, there's a line there. Obviously, there should be a level of, I couldn't think of the word a second ago. We should afford them that to some degree. I really do agree with that, because there are honest people too. We shouldn't also just pretend every cop is a dishonest monster. We should consider that, question all of them, like I say about politicians or anybody in power, but while being open to the information. Don't assume, but question them, because I would argue honest ones would demand that of us. I'd like to believe. So you give them a little bit of that leeway, right? Where you wait for a situation to play, ultimately they have the right to decide. And if it's a very fine line that we can't define, that we can't, like if it was really close, if we watched that video and it was a really fine line, you could argue that maybe he did feel for his life, and that would be a very hard thing to disprove or say he didn't. But since we can see that wasn't the case, then it's obvious ultimately they're trying to fudge that line. But I'm just trying to make clear that there is a very fair argument about honest police officers getting put in positions where maybe they respond incorrectly, and maybe that ends up being something harming or even lethal. I feel like that should be taken into consideration, because not everybody's dishonest. But again, we have to be honest about that line. And if we're in a position where you can see that they're lying about that, then that line gets thrown out the window. So they should be held accountable. And so that is an important discussion. But when we have this kind of evidence, it ultimately doesn't matter. And they're just trying to use that allowance to then ultimately say, no matter what they do, it's always right. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? If the president do it, it's not illegal, right? Trump saying, well, he's the president of Israel, let him go. It's what they're doing right now. They don't want to ever be held accountable. So Elon Musk says the same ICE agent was almost killed several months ago by a guy that hit him with a car and dragged him under. Okay, well, I can't verify that, seeing as how we don't really know who was involved with what, because they're never identifying themselves. Well, let's go through this. Noam says ICE officer who killed woman had been dragged in vehicle ramming months before. And this one part on this, I'll show you. It says this appears to be an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents at the act of domestic terrorism. That's what we just showed you. Think about the way she's framing that with what we just saw. Noam said the officer who fired the shots was briefly treated at the hospital and was now with his family. Again, I think that's completely false. I mean, oh wait, maybe I hope I didn't close that. I showed you the still shots. Oh, maybe I had a video. You'll find it. It's everywhere. Oh, that's what I was looking for earlier. There's the video of him. There was the still shots of it, just walking to his car. It's widely documented. And if he walked to his car, got away, if he stayed around and was engaging with the scene, it's certainly possible that something happened, but it wasn't from that car that didn't hit him. So what are we talking about? We've seen over 100 of these vehicle rammings happen in just the recent weeks. Noam lies about. Oh yeah, 100 of them? I'm sure you only managed to tell us about a few of them because you're just so busy, right? Do we really believe that 100 people were ran with cars and they just didn't tell us that? My point is, you can't find 100 examples. Why would they be so frivolous, so completely transparent with their lies? I just don't even get it. Make it 20. That's crazy, right? It's also a lie, though. ICE alone, she goes on to continue to lie, facing 1,300 increase in assaults. Now it's 1,300. That's also a lie. Again, look it up, ask Rock, do whatever you want. The truth is that was pulled out of nowhere. Tom Homan just mumbled that and everyone went along with it because the lie is about making you the victim. Now, there's clearly, I'm sure, people acting illegally. Happens to police officers all the time. Doesn't mean that it's some increase. It means they're using what they want you to think is happening to justify a crackdown on your life. Starting with who you think you're aiming at, but of course it comes back to you. It always will. In fact, she writes, or it continues, the very same officer who was attacked today had previously been dragged by an anti-ICE rioter who rammed him with the car and dragged him back in June. So June. I can't find an example in June. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Here's January 7th first, or this is the article from recently discussing from CBS News, a few examples. And we've talked about every one of these. The fatal shootout of a woman in ICE enforcement in Minneapolis on Wednesday recalls shootings by federal immigration agents, in Chicago during the height of the Operation Midway Blitz in the fall. September 12th, 2025. An ICE agent shot and killed an undocumented immigrant from Mexico in Franklin Park, Illinois. DHS claimed at the time that a 38-year-old Silvero Villegas Gonzalez, a father of two, had tried to use his car to drive into the agents when they tried to detain him. You'll find the exact same story over and over. DHS officials also claimed the ICE agent who opened fire had been dragged by the car and suffered severe injuries. I'm thinking this is the one they're claiming, by the way, guys, because I'm telling you, there is not an example that I can find that makes this make sense. And September is close. But surveillance video from 2 local businesses showed Gonzalez backing up, driving away, while an agent was on either side of the car. We showed you this. The agent on the passenger side continues standing there, but the agent at the driver's seat can't be seen. In body cam video released 2 weeks later, the agent is heard describing his own injuries as nothing major after the shooting. And this has come out very clearly. Now, they did the same thing where the guy was by the car and tried to act like he got hit because they opened fire and killed somebody. This is covering your own butt here. It says DHS, and it says I got dragged a little bit. Not really, though. Again, we've shown you all these. He basically just got bumped. DHS claimed that Gonzalez was being targeted by ICE agents because of a criminal history that included reckless driving. They did that because they needed to make it sound like he has a history of reckless driving. However, CBS News investigators found that he had only had a record of traffic violations, including speeding, expired driver's license, not having insurance, and having a child restraint seat that was missing. Of course, they lie about reckless driving because they need to make up a story. Guys, this is wholesale lying. So if we know they're doing this, and this is only the first example, why would we ever trust what they're doing everywhere else? Noam and Bondi and Trump, everybody else backed up the lie. They do every time. October 5th, 2025. Federal agents shot a woman in the city's Brighton Park neighborhood after DHS officials said that they had been boxed in. Remember this one? That was a lie. By protesters opposing immigration enforcement. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? This was a lie. DHS claimed U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents. See, it's always an overlap too. That's why they get conflicting information. Because I would argue Border Patrol agents in many cases are much more well trained. I guess they can be. Today, it's getting the same way. As well as there's often local police. So you get bounty hunters out there doing whatever they want, people trying to do the right thing, whatever. And that one driver had a gun. Remember that story? Which they claimed was a semi-automatic weapon. Also a lie. As a result, DHS said agents opened fire, striking the driver. The agents fired 5 shots while the driver was still inside the car. The driver was later identified as 31-year-old Marmor Martinez. Now, here's the crazy part, guys. They lied about the gun. They lied about being boxed in. They opened fire on this woman, then they bragged about it, just like we just saw. So what's crazy is that she had a license for a gun. But unfortunately for their story, the gun was at home. And you could prove all this for yourself. This is just a brief overview. And what's crazy about that is the only way that makes sense to me is that they did this. They opened fire on a U.S. citizen, or I forget. Anyway, to be honest, at this point, it's irrelevant. It's a person in this country. I believe she was a U.S. citizen. And the point being that they fired on her. and said she had a gun because I think they looked up her information and saw a license and just went with the story and then said semi-automatic weapon because they then, remember what the MAGA media did? They went off about the terrorist lefts and their weapons. They made it all up. Less than a week later, a federal grand jury indicted Martinez and her passenger, 21-year-old Anthony Ian Santos Ruiz, for assault and attempted murder of a federal employee in the incident. They claim she had rammed the agent's SUV before opening fire. While DHS claimed Martinez had a semi-automatic weapon, she did not face any gun charges. First, that was the first hole, which is what we saw with them claiming, but Maduro's a drug trafficking. Oh, just take that story away now. We don't need it anymore. I mean, it could just be that they don't care, but I find that to be incompetent. But it's also just that they're just bull rushing forward, knowing they've got people that support them no matter what. Now, Martinez pled not guilty. And it came out in court after all of that, after indicting her, going this far, that the Border Patrol agent who shot Martinez had been allowed to drive the SUV back to Maine, more than 1,000 miles away, despite being central evidence in the trial. Because that was the claim, that they hit the car. So they drove the car away because it didn't have any evidence of being hit. Martinez's attorney sought a hearing to determine whether federal authorities improperly destroyed evidence because the car disappeared. Sounds really honest, doesn't it? In the case against her by allowing the SUV to be taken back to Maine. Then, near the end of November, federal prosecutors dropped all the charges against Martinez and Ruiz. Why? You know why. The charges were dismissed with prejudice, meaning prosecutors cannot refile them in the future. Quote, these agents were lying about what happened. Miss Martinez never rammed anybody. And by the way, there's video, as we showed you at the time. These agents hit Miss Martinez, which we showed you. They ran into her, jumped out of the car, tried to get her out of the car, and then shot her. These agents jumped out and shot Miss Martinez, a U.S. citizen, that's what I thought, whose only crime was warning her fellow community members that ICE was in the neighborhood. She was an observer. She didn't break any laws. But they hated her for doing what they were doing, or she was doing. Now, here's where it gets even crazier before we continue. I think, that's the only one. There's only two in this. I've got more. This is the discussion about this. We just saw them basically cajoling each other and kind of like elbow high-fiving about shooting and killing a U.S. citizen just now. This is what that guy said back on May 6th after they shot the woman, lied about her having a gun, lied about ramming her, and then eventually dropped all the charges. 5 shots, 7 holes. Border Patrol supervisor appeared to brag about shooting a woman, defense attorneys say. No, it's cool. You could see the text messages. It's not saying that. I fired 5 rounds and she had 7 holes. Put that in your book, boys. That's what he said. These are the kind of people that are driving the bus, guys. They're bragging about this, even though they know they lied about what happened. That's despicable. Here's another one. Case dropped against TikTok streamer who was shot by U.S. immigration agents. A federal judge has dismissed an indictment against a Los Angeles TikTok streamer who was shot by an officer during an immigration enforcement operation and accused of assault against a federal agent, citing constitutional violations. Carlitos Ricardo Parias, a TikTok creator who streams local breaking news, was accused in October of, guess what, guys? Ramming a car into immigration agents' vehicles. It's like they could think of a better lie, you'd think, right? But they probably know this works. Why break what's working? After they surrounded him during an operation. So they accusing him of ramming into their cars after they surround him. Right? But again, if they're not identifying themselves, there's no warrants, you don't know what's going on. You could be being kidnapped for all you know. And obviously there's a level of like, okay, I probably can guess it's that, but why would you assume that? Especially when it's within your legal justification to not comply without knowing what's going on. That is the law. And yet they blame him for this. Now, it says body-worn camera footage obtained by Los Angeles Times shows an agent fired his gun during the incident, shooting Parias in the elbow. A ricochet bullet also hit a deputy U.S. Marshal in the hand. Remember that? We talked about this. This is, guys, these are out of control. This was all the way back in December. Oh, I thought this was earlier. This is December 29th, 2025. But going forward, when they're discussing this anyway, it says, quote, the obstacles and roadblocks that ICE has put in place at Adelanto make it difficult, if not impossible, for the defendant to meet with his attorneys and have caused defendant to suffer demonstrable prejudice or a substantial threat thereof. So now what they're saying is, after all this went down, oh, sorry, I skipped the part. It says, Paredes was indicted by a grand jury, just like the last case, was scheduled to go on trial. But a few days later, U.S. District Judge Fernando Olguin ordered the indictment dismissed, saying the government deprived him of his rights. Now, when you get into the reality of the story, you'll break down, as we did then, how this went down, the unjust nature of them opening fire on him for some reason, and then letting it go. Now, whether the judge decided to do it for that reason or not, they yet again dismissed the charges. Now, it says basically the judge is saying the obstacles that they put in front of him, not allowing him to see his lawyer. I mean, to me, that's because you're trying to stop justice. You don't want there to be any kind of accountability. I mean, it's obvious. And this is just one of many examples, at least the ones we can see. And it says he also cited in his order the government's failure to comply with various deadlines in the discovery process. Seems like they know that, seems like a common thread, including its failure to release body-worn camera footage they captured by the deadline, which I don't think they ever did. Why do you think that is? The government has charged Paredes with assault, saying that he used his car as a weapon to ram law enforcement vehicles, which does not appear to be the reality. But in video footage leading up to the shooting, reviewed by LA Times, you ready? Paredes' car did not appear to be moving. The footage shows him asking officers why he's being detained, and an officer threatening to shoot him if he doesn't get out. And then you know what happens. They shoot him because he doesn't get out. You see, this is the kind of childish, petty, small action we're seeing from all these people, and then being backed up by Noam and Trump and everybody else. There's more. This is not even the only examples, guys. That's incredible how many things you can find like this. This is the one that I've shown you and talked about quite a lot. This is back from August 2025. New video shows moments before federal agent fires shots at man during San Bernardino operation. Now, this one I've talked about it plenty, and you can even see the video right here. So essentially, it's hard. It's kind of got the weird kind of fuzzed out sides. I'm not sure why. I think it's because it's a phone video, and they do that to make it look broader, but it's really just that vertical. The point is, the simple story. Let's just kind of get to a quick shot. So right here, so you got they're in the car, right? And I hope you remember this. The son is right there filming. He's the one that speaks English. The other one does not. Now, I don't believe the story, if I remember correctly, was that he did have some kind of immigration overlap. That he wasn't an illegal immigrant, I don't think, but I remember there was some kind of an issue. You can read it. I forget the exact situation. But my point, and the reason that's not relevant, is the way that they handled this. So they're there. They come up on them. And if I remember correctly, I don't think it was even justifiable to what they were doing. It was sort of like he was in limbo of some kind of a meeting, like most of it, by the way. People who were showing up for meetings in accordance with what demand of them, and then they arrest them on the way. It's constant. But they come up to the car. Nobody identifies themselves. They say, get out of the car. And they seriously wait like 10 seconds. And they bash his window in. Now, at that point in time, like I've said, no one's identified themselves. There is no warrant. Within the law, they have the right to move. Now, they also didn't hit anybody, which you can see in the video. They simply drive forward, and you can see from multiple angles the guy didn't get hit. I went over this extensively at the time. So, to brush this down quickly, because we've talked about it many times, they opened fire on the car. There's family and a child in the car. They opened fire and fired multiple shots at a car. Now, this is different than the other one. This is when they were driving away. Like they fired the back of the car and the side as they were driving away. Okay, so then the guy drives home. And guess what he does? He calls the police. Because that's what you do when you're running from a crime, right? He calls the police. He reports what happens. Then they come up later and surround his house with all sorts of high-level DOJ, like all sorts of State Department. What was it? It wasn't State Department. What was that? Anyway, just people above ICE. There was another agency involved. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. So they surround the house, ultimately leave, and don't arrest him. Because they claim it was a sanctuary city. That's what they said. In no way does that stop you from arresting somebody in their house when you claim they actually hit a cop. Because they didn't do that. And this is they opened fire on the family under that guy's saying they tried to hit the cop. They lied. Now, if I remember the story, they then came back later, arrested and charged this guy for something random about running from police or something, and they got it to stick. That's just punitive. You broke the law in every way with what you were doing. On top of that, you opened fire on a family because you were angry about it, then lied about being hit, and then just went back and charged. I mean, this is the unaccountable reality of where we are. And this is happening to U.S. citizens. It's happening to immigrants here legally. It's happening to every walk of life right now. Now, here are some other examples, just to include them. Melanie points out, without due process, they can just claim with no proof that you're an undocumented immigrant, would then detain, incarcerate, and deport you. Without due process, you're guilty with no chance of proving your innocence. This is what came up in the beginning of this. Even if you're an illegal immigrant, you still have a process through which, like everybody who is in this country has constitutional rights to have the evidence presented for the claim. Especially, like we said, and anybody honest was pointing out, that you could be an American citizen without any identification who just happens to look like you're not, and then get deported because they accuse you of that without proving it. Couldn't that happen if you're not requiring it? Of course it could. In fact, it gets abused, like we already saw. But this is ICE brutally tackles volunteer to the ground, 73-year-old U.S. citizen. He says, folks, we're just waiting for the bus. Agents didn't even ask for his papers. They just detained him. And it's a U.S. citizen, 73 years old. They threw him to the ground, arrested him, took him away, and eventually let him go because he was a U.S. citizen. That is exactly the point. Why would anybody be okay with that? Most aren't. Just people lie about it. Here, this one's actually pretty crazy more than most. These guys were on a cruise ship. I'll play the clip for you. They raid the ship. They raid the little cabin they're in. The wife is naked. They try to steal her phone. The guy's a U.S. citizen. He's a veteran of the Coast Guard. If you can't see by now where this is already at, and let alone where it's going, I don't think you want to. And frankly, like I said, I think most people are honest in this conversation, and most people are outraged about this. Many of which are probably trying to be quiet about it because they're unhappy, because they feel like they were double-crossed, because they feel like it makes them look stupid. I get it, but it's not in your interest to hide from this. The reality is it's coming. It's here. It's happening to Republicans. It's happening to American citizens. It's happening to veterans. It's happening to liberals. It's happening to everybody, as always.
Last day of a 9-day Carnival cruise with friends and family.
We were both dead asleep.
When they say ICE agents stormed into their room.
Then we got this pounding of the door. Yeah, it burst open. 3 men came in with flashlights in their faces, yelling commands, ordering me out of bed, and put me against the wall and handcuffed me.
They had called a female agent because they realized I wasn't dressed. And so she came in the room and she saw me filming and she jumped on top of me to try and get my phone. And I pushed her off once, and she jumped again and snatched it from my hand.
Martinez, who's a U.S. citizen and Coast Guard veteran, was taken from his wife and put in a holding cell in an unknown location off the boat.
I mean, thankfully it was early, so I don't think a ton of people saw me, but, you know, it was just...
It was still humiliating. I mean, he doesn't have a criminal record. He's never been arrested. He's never had handcuffs on.
Okay, so explain this then. Why in the world would this happen? Oopsie, we made a mistake. Okay, even if that's the truth, doesn't that make the point? Oopsie, we didn't realize. Now you're in El Salvador. Yeah, exactly why there's supposed to be a process. Exactly why you're supposed to identify yourself and present a warrant and go through. They're not. Anybody saying otherwise, including Noam and McLaughlin, who have blatantly lied repeatedly about not deporting and arresting U.S. citizens, they have repeatedly.
Was shared until finally.
This was all based off of just my first and last name. They said that they thought this was someone who had warrants for drug trafficking.
After almost 2 hours.
They took my fingerprints to help verify my identity, took my photo.
It was realized they had the wrong guy and brought Martinez back to the boat.
No apology, no, we're so sorry for the mistaken identity.
You see, that's the biggest one, not the biggest, one of the frustrating issues. They're just petty, angry people. Like, why wouldn't you be like, hey, I'm sorry, man. Like, we thought we were doing the right thing. No, they don't even think they're doing the right thing. They're doing what they hate, or rather attacking what they hate. It's driven by ideology, by hatred, by the wrong motivation, at least in what I can see playing out. Because why wouldn't you, if he's a U.S. citizen, aren't you supposed to be fighting for U.S. citizens? Who knows? Maybe they just hate him because he doesn't look like them. That seems to be a factor today. It should anger everybody who believes in what we're fighting for. You know, what you claim anyway, the Constitution, liberty, freedom.
No, you know, at one point I remember hearing one of the agents saying that they didn't feel good about the way everything happened and that they...
I believe that's because there are people within this that aren't monsters that the leaders driving it are. And maybe and I think this is why they go to the lowest common denominator, because people who care about what they're actually doing are the ones that don't toe the line and they get kicked aside. In politics, in enforcement, everywhere.
Kind of knew beforehand that this was going to be a name mismatch, kind of mistaken identity, but they still proceeded to follow through. Yeah.
Now as they reflect.
I didn't necessarily think I wouldn't see him again, but it was just, I didn't know what he was going through.
They're overcome with emotion.
You should worry about that today. That's not an illegitimate concern, guys. It's happened to people. including American citizens.
This is happening to people every day. But it's unfair that it's happening in this country at all. So.
Yeah, this is not the USA of 10 years ago, you know. It's a different country.
Yeah, not the country I serve for.
And anger.
Yeah, well, I mean, to a degree, yeah. But if we're going to be honest with ourselves, it kind of is, though. It's just been less bombastic. It's been more behind the scenes. It's been more subtle. It's been to a less degree, but it is happening. I mean, you can go back to Biden's administration, you go back to Bush and Obama, and you can very clearly watch, the droning campaigns or the, or the killing a U.S. citizen, right? In Yemen, right? We talked about this. There are examples here. What's happening now, I argue, is just the culmination of where it was always going. So I do agree. It is more crazy right now. And that is, I think, in some ways, actually because of Trump's personality. But it's not unique to Trump, and it's not unique to Republicans. And I think it's very clearly an all of U.S. government agenda.
Over why this happened in the first place.
He has TSA pre-check. He's had an FBI background check because he has his concealed carry. He's a military veteran. They had his passport. They could have figured all this out without ever even speaking to us.
Yep. They could have vetted my information and used that rather than this, raiding our room the way they did.
Carnival Cruise Line tells us they're aware that U.S. Customs and Border Protection took a guest into custody but wouldn't go into further detail. ICE has yet to respond to our request for comment. You can find more on our website at 12news.com. In Phoenix, Jay Cunningham, 12 News.
Wild. Here's the article where I discussed that. DHS lies about detaining, deporting U.S. citizens. And, hey, look at that. Trump reportedly ready to attack Venezuela. Look at that. October 31st, 2025. Pay attention to TLAV and you're ahead of the curve. So here is the article if you want to check it out. It's just the same conversation, but just from an article from corporate media. Here's another example of just a larger point. No, it's funny. You can't see the title. That's stupid. Oh, that's why. That's weird. They just pop up all of a sudden. So it says, 2025 was ISIS's deadliest year in 2 decades. Here are the 32 people who died in custody. Well, while in their care, guys. I mean, so we can talk about the larger conversation. It goes way beyond that. We're talking about 32 people who you've taken custody of who die in your care just in 2025. That also sounds like any number of despotic, horrible places that are, I mean, I don't know how you frame it today, that are, it's where we're going, guys. And it's where we already are. It's what those places are largely like that because of these groups. We need to start being honest about this. Now, just to wrap up in this in general, Minnesota state officials said the FBI is now solely leading the investigation into the deadly ICE shooting after they were denied access to the case materials. Great. So now you've got local people who might have an interest in actually doing the right thing, who are being boxed out by the cash FBI, who clearly cares about doing the right thing, guys, right? How are the Epstein files going? I mean, this group has this will go down in history because of him as one of the most ridiculous FBI administrations I've ever seen in my life. Repeatedly being caught for, I mean, who knows why? Whether he's, I'm not going to, theorizing is important in some cases, but you could argue it's because of him alone or because the entire institution is a completely corrupt thing. The idea that you're boxing out authorities is never the way this goes. The reason this makes sense to me is because the FBI, led by Trump's administration, is trying to control the way this goes down because it's a huge story that is already blowing up in their face. And they're going to manage it. Here's the one followed up after that. Minnesota investigators say they can't access evidence after fatal ICE shooting, and FBI won't work jointly on the probe. Actually, I think I got those mixed up. The second one was that they're taking complete control of it. So first they were going, why can't we access the information? Why are you letting us in? And then the FBI says we're taking complete control of it. Now, J.D. Vance, of course, says the ICE agent has absolute immunity. Oh, yeah? Because that's logical, right? That makes total sense. He can go out there and rape women and shoot people in the face, and now he gets immunity because we're in charge. This is insane. There's no world in which anybody should go, yeah, that makes sense. They're the absolute last people who should have immunity because they're upholding the law. They should be held to a higher standard. Same reason politicians should not be immune from responsibility, especially when you just murdered somebody in broad daylight because they were driving away. Now, Matt McDermott points out, A reminder, it's recently reported that ICE slashed officer training from 5 months to 47 days, he says, to flatter Trump's ego with 47 president. But guys, 5 months is ridiculous. 47 days, that's largely, I think, in part why you're getting this, probably because they wanted that. Recruits showed up without full vetting, with criminal records, failed drug tests, not meeting basic standards. But yeah, go ahead. It's not a joke, guys. You can look this up for yourself. On top of the fact that now, going forward, ICE officials plan to spend $100 million in 1 year to recruit gun rights supporters and military enthusiasts through online influencers and a geo-targeted advertising campaign, according to their own documents. Great. I'm sure we're going to get the best of the best from the mindless partisan followers that end up wanting to hate Democrats because you tell them to. Good times. Now, here is the scary part. On top of all of it, here's what Vance just casually laid out for you.
Done is actually getting 2.5 million illegal aliens out without any of the really big marquee things that we've been working on. That was just simple willpower.
Oh, great. So you haven't seen anything yet so far.
And the President of the United States coming in and saying this is done. I think we're going to see those deportation numbers ramp up as we get more and more people online, working for ICE, going door to door and making sure that if you're an illegal alien, you've got to get out of this country. And if you want to come back, apply through the proper channel.
Oh, yeah, but then get deported again because you're not legal yet, which is what they've done. People literally going through the right channels, getting deported on their way to meetings. Guy's a hypocrite, or he's too stupid to know that's happening. But door to door, he says. Yep. Because that lines up with what we always talk about, right? ICE or any authority agents going door to door to check and make sure you're the right kind of person. Right in line with American values, right, guys? Disturbing remarks. JD casually suggests ICE will go door to door, openly flirting with trampling the Fourth Amendment. These are not beating those Nazi allegations. Here's U.S. Department of Labor on January 6th. We are going to win. America first. And I agree with Marcus Diotzen says, win at what? I don't even know what you're playing here. Win? Like, what are you talking about? Like, so this is, I think what we're talking about, quite honestly, is stuff like this. Think about this overlapping point. This is from December 31st. It says, the peace of the nation no longer besieged by the third world. America after 100 million deportations. Oh, this is fun. I didn't see this. This post uses Hiroshi's Nagi's artwork without permission. Guys, they've been caught doing this repeatedly. The White House, Homeland Security, or like they just used the Mr. Clean logo. I doubt they paid for that. They just don't care because they're powerful. Might makes right. Oh, excuse me. Peace through strength. I said it wrong. I mean, guys, that's what they're doing. And that's a small example, but they just don't care. Whether Trump will sue them, it just doesn't even matter. But so he himself has posted that this illustrations are being used without his authorization. Yeah, it's a small example, but there's nothing that they guide the guys. The law doesn't matter. Nothing applies to them. They're powerful, so shut up. Now, the point, America after 100 million deportations. Well, Aaron points out the entire U.S. foreign-born population is only 45 million people. So either they're that stupid or they're insinuating that a hell of a lot of Americans are going to be deported. He says, so this ridiculous edgelord post by taxpayer-funded trolls is suggesting deporting 55 million native-born citizens. Well, how many times have we seen Trump tell you that citizens might be next? It's not a joke. This is about this is interesting for many reasons. The Joneses of the world have talked about FEMA camps and all sorts for the longest time. Well, guess what? They're building, and as this person frames it, a concentration camp industry in the United States and are deporting and selling captives to be tortured in prisons and labor camps. The U.S. government is industrializing a global slave trade again. New ICE facility being planned for Jupiter, Florida, part of a plan to hold 80,000 immigrants in warehouses. And what you'll find is those are popping up all over the country. But it's okay, though, because they're Trump's FEMA camps or whatever you want to call it. I'm just making a point. You know, it's like North American Union, but that's good now because Trump and yay and totally not globalism, disgustingly hypocritical, and we should call it out. But worthy of note, and I think what's happening here is the same agenda, as always. And you being in the crosshairs, because they have to be. Well, as Darek Tennis points out, Elon Musk spent, he posted this today, but this goes over the last couple of days. He spent several hours last night amplifying every post he could find, justifying the murder of an innocent woman by Trump Gestapo. Now, whatever you think about the framing, He does this. And you can prove they're wrong about what they're saying. But he's out there going, yes, 100%, thumbs up to every single thing, no matter how illogical, without any evidence, that simply says what he agrees with. This is why there's difference between, this is not this is like what's a good example? I mean, he's the one behind the scenes dictating and controlling this platform. So it's quite a bit different when he's back there illegitimately putting up things that he says and what he thinks. This is about controlling the narrative. When he wakes up today, expect him to get back to telling Europeans to rise up against their oppressive, tyrannical governments. Right. God, it's such a cartoon, man. It's just so crazy. Oh, lastly, I just wanted to point this out. Who knows if it'll go anywhere? I'm not even familiar with Robin Kelly here, but she says, I'll be filing articles of impeachment against Kristi Noem. Good. I think she's illegitimate. So too is a lot of other people. You can go back to Biden's administration and Blinken and plenty. Same thing. In this case, though, we're here now. This is a crime, and they deserve to be called out for it. So does Trump. What they're doing is wrong. So we'll see what happens. She's simply making it about just ICE and the rogue force violating the Constitution, which is true. But it's not just Kristi Noem. I mean, she's just following orders, guys. But start somewhere. And lastly, Trump invoking Insurrection Act. Speculation grows after ICE shooting. Now, it's just speculation. But let's think this through on what's already happened, right? With where we were, where we've been, the idea of Trump already floating the idea of insurrection for numerous things, or the act, excuse me. I mean, it started with the idea of Venezuela, which, by the way, was so shockingly flimsy, but he pushed it. And so now we're at a point where we have another surge of things like this, and him declaring this would fit every single agenda he's trying to accomplish. But, maybe he sees that we all see it. It's hard to say. But I'm just thinking about where that goes. And using things like this to bull rush us into another agenda with another false reasoning, it makes sense. So it's why we need to be on guard, be questioning, calling these things out. I think I want to end with the clip of Trump. It's not popping up. Oh, here we go. Hold on. There we go. And Trump deporting U.S. citizens. Because I think it's really alarming that we can have that laid out the way it is. Have them focusing, attacking. Even just the idea of the deportation numbers. Whether that's an accident or not, the idea that they floated this should be concerning to all of us. And as they're violating rights of everybody, as we just saw a U.S. citizen executed in broad daylight, maybe we should consider that there might be something behind this. But at the very least, question them. That should be your immediate go-to, whether left or right or aware that it's all a lie. Question them. Question me. Question the people. But that doesn't mean ignore. Question quite literally means interrogate, investigate, consider, and question. Consider all things. Question everything. Absolute all the time, guys. It just has to be the way to go. So thank you for tuning in today, guys. I appreciate your support. We need it. Plenty going on right now. And we have plenty more coming your way, as we said, with the fundraiser on the 16th we're going to be doing. I've got, I believe, a couple articles coming from Derek that'll come out over the next couple of days, possibly tomorrow. And more things on the horizon in general, as well as me continuing to do my best on this work with all the stuff going on. But I couldn't do it without you. When I say that, though, I was just thinking about this earlier. I legitimately mean that. Sure, I could be talking about stuff. I could be doing it. But do you think this platform would exist without all of you? It wouldn't. It wouldn't be here. This would not be a platform without all of you continuing to support me or doing it from the very beginning. How else I could not do this without you. You are the last American vagabond. So thank you for being here. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's a special category of person?
You said this morning 20 years in jail, and then maybe they'll go to one of these prisons in El Salvador. Do you think with the way that the judges have been issuing injunctions, it would be easier or harder to send these Tesla domestic terrorists to a jail in El Salvador than these MS-13 or Tren de Arrival guys?
Well, I view these people as terrorists just like others.
Could we use it for violent criminals, our own violent criminals?
I call them homegrown criminals.
Yes.
I mean, the
homegrowns.
The ones that grew up and something went wrong and they hit people over the head with a baseball bat. We have, and push people into subways just before the train gets there, like you see happening sometimes. We are looking into it and we want to do it. I would love to do that. Fortunately, I'd like to say, you know, a little controversial, but I couldn't care less. We have a lot of bad criminals that came into this country, and they came in stupidly. It was an unforced error. It was an incompetent president that allowed it to happen. It was an auto pen maybe that allowed it to happen, and it did happen. But we also have a lot of bad people that have been here for a long time. People that whack people over the head with a baseball bat from behind when they're not looking and kill them. People that knife you when you're walking down the street. They're not new to our country. They're old to our country. Many of them were born in our country. I think we ought to get them the hell out of here, too. You want to know the truth. So maybe that'll be the next job that we'll work on together.
In some respects, it's just as bad now, the authoritarianism that is coming, Gerald. I am really, really fearful for the President of the United States of America to suggest, as he did on Air Force One on Sunday night, that American citizens could be deported. For his press secretary to say, we're looking into a way to see if this is legal. We don't know if it's legal or not. A, is terrifying. B, betrays such a profound ignorance of first principles to which he is sworn. He is sworn to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and to enforce federal law.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What, do you think there's a special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones, too.
Profoundly un-American, utterly unconstitutional, and I'm sorry to say, is coming.